A journey into the heart of ancient Greece unfolds, inviting all to immerse themselves in the timeless narratives that have echoed through millennia. These are the profound stories, meticulously preserved and lovingly transmitted across countless generations, akin to cherished heirlooms passed from elder to youth. As the ambient illumination softens and a sense of calm descends, the clamor of the contemporary world begins to recede, much like the ethereal morning mist that dissipates over the cerulean waters of the Aegean. There exists an undeniable enchantment in the collective experience of delving into these venerable tales. Whether one is witnessing the sun's majestic descent over a familiar urban landscape or navigating the profound stillness of the late hours, a global tapestry of kindred spirits, dreamers, and devotees of myth converges in this shared moment of quiet contemplation. With the gentle dimming of lights, and perhaps the subtle hum of a fan providing a soothing backdrop, the stage is set for an odyssey back to an epoch when divine beings walked among mortals, and every crag and crevice held a profound secret. Imagine a solitary trek into the most secluded depths of an ancient Greek woodland. The very air is redolent with the crisp aroma of pine needles and the earthy scent of wild herbs. Sunlight, fractured and diffused, penetrates the dense arboreal canopy, scattering luminous patches of golden warmth upon the forest floor. It is within this pristine, almost hallowed setting, a domain rarely trespassed by mortal footfall and the preferred sanctuary of the revered goddess Artemis, that the inaugural chapter of this unfolding narrative commences. Artemis, it must be understood, diverged significantly from her Olympian counterparts, who reveled in the bustling social milieu of Mount Olympus. As the formidable goddess of the hunt and the steadfast protector of untamed creatures, her reverence for solitude eclipsed almost all other considerations, while other deities indulged in lavish banquets and engaged in dramatic celestial disputes. Artemis sought solace in the serene wilderness, her sole companions being her loyal hunting retinue. On a particular afternoon, as the sun ascended to its zenith, Artemis had been engaged in the pursuit of game since the first blush of dawn. Her exquisite silver bow shimmered with a subtle luminescence amidst the dappled light, and her disciplined pack of hunting hounds moved with an almost ethereal silence through the dense undergrowth. Yet, as the day reached its apex, a different yearning stirred within her, a desire for replenishment and repose. She sought the cleansing embrace of water. Concealed deep within this verdant expanse, veiled by an undulating curtain of weeping willow branches, lay Artemis's clandestine bathing pool. Its pristine waters were fed by a natural spring, bubbling forth from the earth's profound depths, maintaining an exquisite coolness and an unparalleled clarity. The pool's bed was adorned with smooth, river-worn stones, while soft moss clung delicately to the surrounding rocks. It was a place that inherently commanded reverence, inspiring whispers even in absolute solitude. Artemis, with an almost imperceptible gesture, parted the willow branches and stepped into her sacred haven. Her hunting companions, the nymphs who had forsaken the conventional lives of river and tree spirits to follow her, began the ritualistic removal of her hunting accoutrements. They unlaced her sturdy leather boots, carefully lifted away her quiver brimming with silver arrows, and reverently set aside her prized bow. The goddess, with a soft exhalation of utter contentment, descended into the cool embrace of the water. This, she knew, was the most cherished segment of her day, a precious interlude where she could shed the mantle of a formidable Olympian and simply luxuriate in the sensation of cool water against her skin after a rigorous morning of the chase. Now, the narrative poised to take an unforeseen and dramatic turn. Not far distant, crashing through the forest with considerably less grace than the divine Artemis, was a young mortal hunter named Actaeon. Actaeon, though proficient in the art of the hunt, possessed a distinct lack of spatial awareness. He had been relentlessly tracking a particularly elusive deer throughout the morning, its hoofprints leading him ever deeper into the heart of the forest. His eager hunting dogs, noses pressed to the ground, followed ahead, completely engrossed in the compelling scent trail. Unbeknownst to Actaeon, he was encroaching upon sacred ground. This particular section of the forest was consecrated to Artemis, and mortal intrusion was absolutely forbidden. Naturally, there were no explicit warnings or signs. This was, after all, ancient Greece, not a modern nature preserve. Yet an almost palpable sense of ancient power permeated the air, a subtle but insistent warning that should have compelled him to retreat. Actaeon, pushing through an exceptionally dense thicket of bushes, was drawn by the faint murmur of running water. He speculated that the deer he pursued might have paused to quench its thirst. His dogs, uncharacteristically silent, suggested they were nearing their quarry. And then, with startling suddenness, he emerged at the very precipice of Artemis's secluded pool. For a suspended moment, time itself seemed to halt. Artemis, ethereal in the water, surrounded by her attendant nymphs, raised her gaze to meet the astonished face of the unexpected intruder. Her silver eyes, initially wide with shock, swiftly narrowed with an ominous intensity. One might reasonably assume that Actaeon would have instantly offered profuse apologies and fled. Such a reaction would have been the prudent course. Instead, he remained transfixed, simply staring. Perhaps he was too stunned to move. Perhaps he was utterly mesmerized by the unprecedented vision of an actual goddess. Or perhaps the sheer impossibility of the scene rendered him incapable of belief. Artemis's nymphs, with gasps of alarm, instinctively moved to shield their divine mistress from view. But it was already too late. Actaeon had witnessed what no mortal was ever permitted to behold. And Artemis, the formidable goddess of the hunt and the fiercely protective guardian of privacy, was consumed by a profound and chilling fury. Yet, a fascinating aspect of the Olympian deities was their preferred mode of retribution. They seldom resorted to mere shouting when incensed. Their chosen method was often a display of creative, often terrifying punishment. And Artemis, in particular, exhibited a chilling ingenuity when confronting those who dared to violate her sacred privacy. She reached down, scooping a handful of the cool spring water. But as it rested in her divine palms, the water began to radiate with an otherworldly luminescence, imbued with celestial power. Without uttering a single word, she flung the enchanted water directly at Actaeon's face. The water struck him with the startling sensation of liquid starlight. For a fleeting instant, Actaeon registered nothing but the refreshing coolness against his skin. Then, slowly, bizarrely, an unsettling transformation began to unfold within him. It commenced with his reflection in the tranquil pool, where his human visage should have been. He perceived something utterly different gazing back. His nose elongated, darkening in hue. His ears grew, shifting shape, migrating to the crown of his head. Antlers, magnificent and branching, began to sprout from his skull. Actaeon attempted to cry out, to offer an apology, to articulate that his intrusion had been entirely unintentional. But when he parted his lips, no human words emerged. Instead, he heard the terrified bleat of a deer. His hands, when he cast his gaze upon them, were no longer hands at all. They were hooves. His clothing hung loosely from his rapidly altering frame as he diminished in stature and transformed. His human consciousness persisted, trapped within, but his physical form was now entirely that of a magnificent stag. And then a sound reached him that sent a surge of primal terror through his newly formed deer heart, the unmistakable baying of dogs. His own hunting hounds, having detected the commotion of the transformation, came rushing to investigate. But they did not perceive their master, Actaeon. All they saw was a large stag, standing near their preferred hunting ground, and they reacted precisely as hunting dogs are instinctively trained to do. Actaeon tried desperately to call to them, to make them comprehend his true identity. But deer do not speak the language of dogs, and his once loyal companions now perceived only prey where their beloved master had stood. What transpired next was, perhaps, the most poignant and tragic element of this entire narrative. Actaeon, his human intellect still intact but imprisoned within the body of a deer, was forced to flee for his very life from his own cherished hunting pack. He crashed through the dense forest, leaping over fallen logs and expertly dodging between trees, while behind him, his dogs pursued with the same enthusiastic zeal they had always displayed when hunting alongside him. He ran until his legs trembled with exhaustion. He sought refuge behind rocks and within thick bushes, but inevitably, as the sun began its descent, his own dogs finally cornered him. Meanwhile, back at the secluded pool, Artemis had concluded her bath and redonned her hunting attire. Her nymphs gathered around her, still discussing the audacious mortal who had stumbled into their sacred domain. Was it truly necessary to be so severe? One of the nymphs ventured quietly. He seemed so young. Perhaps he was merely lost. Artemis picked up her silver bow, testing the string with a single finger. It produced a soft, musical resonance in the hushed forest. "Privacy is inviolable," she stated simply. "Mortals must learn that certain boundaries are sacrosanct and must never be breached, even by accident." She paused for a moment, listening intently to the distant sounds of the forest. Somewhere in the far-off distance, she discerned the triumphant barking of dogs. She understood its implication. "Besides," she added, her voice perhaps a fraction softer than before, "he was a hunter. He comprehended the intrinsic relationship between predator and prey. Now, he has experienced both facets of that very relationship." As the cloak of night descended over the forest, Artemis and her companions vanished into the deepening shadows between the trees, leaving behind only the gentle murmur of the bubbling spring and the whisper of the wind through the willow branches. Yet, a lingering question persists, prompting contemplation about the true essence of this story. Was Artemis merely safeguarding her privacy, or was there a more profound, underlying truth at play? In the ancient world, it was widely held that the gods occasionally employed harsh lessons to impart vital truths to mortals concerning respect, boundaries, and the inexorable consequences of one's choices. And what of Actaeon himself? Some renditions of the tale insinuate that his innocence was not absolute, suggesting he may have deliberately sought out the goddess, harboring hopes of catching a glimpse of her. Others maintain he was genuinely a lost hunter, who through an unfortunate twist of fate stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. The question remains, was Artemis's punishment just, or was it excessively severe for what might have been an innocent misstep? And if one were in Actaeon's perilous position, would the instinct have been to turn and flee the instant the forbidden sight was apprehended? Or would the overwhelming sense of awe have rendered one utterly motionless? The inquiry regarding equitable retribution naturally leads to an even more somber chronicle, one woven with threads of familial bonds, profound apprehension, and the dreadful deeds individuals are driven to commit when gripped by the terror of relinquishing authority. Should the severity of Artemis's judgment upon Actaeon have seemed stark, one is urged to consider the actions of Cronus against his own progeny, a narrative that plunges deeper into the abyss of ancient Greek understanding, transporting the listener further back in time to the very genesis of the cosmos. This epoch predated the celestial reign of Zeus from the hallowed peaks of Mount Olympus. It was an era long before the construction of sacred temples, the foundation of human settlements, or indeed, the very existence of humankind itself. In those primeval days, the nascent world found itself under the dominion of formidable entities known as Titans. These colossal and immensely powerful beings were the direct offspring and subsequent generations born from the primordial earth itself. Among this formidable pantheon, the undisputed sovereign of all Titans was Cronus. It must be underscored that Cronus did not ascend to his royal station through any form of democratic mandate or an orderly, peaceful succession. On the contrary, his acquisition of power was predicated upon a heinous act perpetrated against his own father, Uranus, employing a crescent-shaped blade thoughtfully provided by his mother. Cronus had launched a brutal assault upon Uranus, orchestrating a violent coup d'etat that reverberated with such force it threatened to shatter the very fabric and foundational principles of existence. One might reasonably assume that the successful overthrow of his progenitor would have imbued Cronus with a profound sense of security in his newly claimed power. Yet the stark opposite proved true. Each passing day saw him consumed by gnawing anxiety that an identical fate might befall him. With every dusk, as he prepared for slumber, his mind was plagued by the unsettling question of whether one of his own offspring might be secretly conspiring against him, mirroring the very treachery he had visited upon his father. Then, one fateful day, Cronus received a prophetic utterance that rendered his most profound anxieties appear trifling by comparison. This chilling prophecy emanated directly from the Fates themselves, those three venerable sisters, the Moirai, who possessed the preternatural to perceive the intricate threads of destiny as they stretched inexorably into the future. Their pronouncement was stark, utterly terrifying, and utterly impossible to disregard. One of your children is destined to overthrow you, precisely as you overthrew your father. In the face of such disturbing revelations concerning their future, most individuals might endeavor to alter their conduct in an effort to avert the foretold calamitous outcome. They might, for instance, resolve to become more benevolent parents, or to nurture their children with an abundance of affection and a diminished measure of fear. Cronus, however, regrettably opted for a far more drastic and unyielding course of action. He concluded that if he were to possess no children, then no child could ever rise to usurp his throne. Nevertheless, An immediate predicament arose. Cronus was already bound in matrimony to his sister, Rhea, a marital arrangement that, for Titans, was evidently considered entirely conventional, and she was, at that very moment, pregnant with their inaugural offspring. Consequently, Cronus conceived a plan that was simultaneously chillingly straightforward and utterly monstrous in its implications. He would permit the children to be born, and then, without hesitation, he would consume them. One might vividly envision the harrowing tableau when their firstborn, a daughter christened Hestia, entered the world. Rhea, her body weary from the rigors of childbirth, yet radiating the incandescent joy of new motherhood, tenderly cradled her infant close, her gaze softening as she smiled down at the tiny, flawless visage. She likely entertained a myriad of dreams and aspirations, envisioning the countless wonders she would impart to her daughter, the myriad locales they would discover together, and the boundless love they would undoubtedly share. It was at this poignant moment that Cronus strode into the chamber. "Present the child to me," he commanded, his deep, resonant Titan voice rumbling through the space. Rhea must have innocently presumed he wished to hold his daughter, to extend a father's blessing and welcome her into existence. Instead, Cronus clasped the infant in his colossal hands, unhinged his maw to an impossibly vast extent, and with a single, dreadful gulp, swallowed little Hestia whole. The sheer magnitude of Rhea's horror is scarcely conceivable. One struggles to fathom her anguished screams, her desperate, futile attempts to intervene, her utter inability to comprehend the motivation behind her husband's monstrous deed. Yet Cronus merely wiped his lips with a gesture of finality and departed, his monstrous appetite sated, convinced that he had successfully neutralized at least one potential challenge to his sovereign authority. The truly agonizing aspect of this unfolding tragedy was that it represented no singular, isolated act of derangement. When their second child, a daughter named Demeter, was brought forth, the identical, gruesome event transpired. Cronus seized the newborn and summarily devoured her. Next came Hera, their third progeny, who met the same grim fate. Then Hades, their first son, vanished in a solitary swallow. And finally, Poseidon, their second son, another swift gulp, another child, irrevocably lost into the cavernous depths of their father's gullet. At this juncture, a natural query arises concerning the destination of these children, once Cronus had consumed them. Were they consigned to oblivion? The answer is simultaneously unsettling and paradoxically somewhat reassuring, for Cronus was an immortal Titan, and his offspring, too, possessed the gift of immortality. Thus, when he swallowed them, they did not perish. Instead, they found themselves ensnared within his vast stomach, alive, yet perpetually imprisoned within an unbroken, suffocating darkness. One can only attempt to imagine the existential plight of these children, sentient, cognizant, able to perceive the presence of their siblings in the inky blackness, yet utterly incapable of escape. They were denied the opportunity to mature, to explore the boundless world, or to engage in any activity beyond existing in the warm, constricted gloom of their father's internal confines. Throughout this period of escalating horror, Rhea's despair and heartbreak intensified with each successive child she lost. She pleaded fervently with Cronus to cease his abominable actions. She endeavored to conceal herself when her labor commenced. She implored other Titans for assistance, but Cronus reigned supreme as king, and the pervasive fear he inspired prevented anyone from daring to intervene. By the time Rhea found herself pregnant with her sixth child, a resolute conviction had settled upon her. She had to adopt a radically different strategy. She simply could not endure the agony of losing yet another infant to her husband's insatiable, paranoid appetite. Consequently, she meticulously devised a scheme that was both ingeniously cunning and fraught with immense peril. When the moment arrived for the birth of her sixth child, Rhea deliberately shunned their palatial residence. Instead, she journeyed to a secluded grotto nestled on the remote island of Crete. There, enveloped by the supportive presence of amiable nymphs who diligently muffled the sounds of childbirth, she brought forth a son, whom she named Zeus. However, instead of conveying the infant Zeus back to his father, Rhea ingeniously wrapped a substantial stone in swaddling clothes typically used for newborns. She meticulously ensured that the stone replicated the approximate size and heft of a human infant. She even affixed a diminutive cap to the bundle, so that from a distance, it would convincingly resemble a genuine baby. With her deception carefully prepared, she returned to their abode and presented this substitute infant to Cronus. One might naturally surmise that a father would possess the innate ability to distinguish between an authentic newborn and a mere rock enveloped in blankets. Yet, it is crucial to recall that Cronus harbored no paternal affection. His sole preoccupation was not with fatherhood. His mind was so singularly fixated on eradicating potential threats to his dominion that he never deigned to truly observe his children before dispatching them into his gullet. Therefore, when Rhea extended the swaddled bundle, Cronus accepted it without any genuine scrutiny, and with habitual indifference swallowed the stone whole, just as he had consumed his 5 previous offspring. In the interim, the infant Zeus remained sequestered within the hidden cave on Crete, where he was diligently nurtured by the benevolent nymphs and sustained by a diet of golden honey and the nourishing milk of a magical goat named Amalthea. With each passing day, he steadily grew in stature and strength, and with equal regularity, Rhea visited him in secret, recounting tales of his imprisoned siblings, trapped within their father's digestive confines. As Zeus transitioned from infancy into robust young manhood, he assimilated the full extent of his father's profound paranoia and the horrific deeds that such fear had compelled him to commit. Slowly but inexorably, Zeus began to meticulously formulate his plan for retribution. Yet, what renders this particular narrative especially compelling is its nuance. Zeus was not merely contemplating the punishment of his father for his inherent cruelty. His overarching objective also encompassed the liberation of his brothers and sisters. In stark contrast to Cronus, who perceived his own progeny solely as potential usurpers and existential threats, Zeus regarded them as cherished members of his family, individuals who unequivocally deserved their freedom. The profound query that persistently troubled Zeus as he meticulously orchestrated his strategy was this: was he, too, predestined to mirror the tyrannical nature of his father? Would the act of overthrowing Cronus merely transform him into another ruthless sovereign, irrevocably condemned to fear and, ultimately, to destroy his own children in some distant future? Or could he, through his actions, decisively shatter the insidious cycle of violence that had passed from Uranus to Cronus and now menacingly threatened to perpetuate itself through him? One is left to ponder what underlying forces compel an individual to view their own flesh and blood as adversaries. Is it solely the pervasive dread of forfeiting authority? Or does something far more profound reside at its core? A fundamental incapacity to prioritize the welfare and love of others over one's own precarious sense of security. Speaking of these inescapable cycles of violence and their often unforeseen repercussions, the subsequent narrative commences with one of the most exquisitely beautiful outcomes imaginable, one that paradoxically emerged from one of the most brutal acts chronicled in the entirety of ancient mythology. It is as if the ancient Greeks, through this tale, sought to convey a profound truth. Even the most terrible events can, against all odds, give birth to something truly wondrous. The reader may recall the violent manner in which Cronus deposed his father, Uranus, employing that infamous curved blade. Well, the ancient bards and chroniclers possessed remarkably specific beliefs regarding the aftermath of that pivotal, violent moment. They posited that when Uranus sustained his grievous wound, droplets of his immortal blood cascaded into the vast expanse of the sea. And from that divine ichor, mingling inextricably with the frothing foam and saline waters of the boundless ocean, a miraculous genesis began to take form. One is invited to visualize the scene, the expansive Mediterranean Sea on a morning of such profound tranquility that its surface shimmered like a sheet of polished glass. The sun was just commencing its ascent, painting the heavens in ethereal gradients of soft pink and shimmering gold. Gentle, rhythmic waves lapped against the shoreline, depositing the customary treasures that the ocean habitually yields. Fragments of smooth sea glass, intriguing shells, and intricate tangles of seaweed. However, on this particular morning, the incoming waves carried something utterly unprecedented, a sight unlike any witnessed before. Initially, it presented itself as mere sea foam, the familiar white, effervescent substance that materializes when waves collide with rocky outcrops. Yet this foam was distinctly different. It emanated a soft, pearlescent luminescence, glowing with an otherworldly light. Crucially, it did not dissipate like ordinary foam. Instead, it progressively expanded in size and intensified in radiance as it drifted inexorably toward the shore. And then, with an almost imperceptible slowness and a profound grace, a resplendent figure began to ascend from within the heart of the glowing, ethereal foam. This was Aphrodite, the venerated goddess of love and beauty, making her divine appearance, born directly from the very essence of the sea itself. The ancient Hellenes held exceptionally precise notions regarding the quintessential embodiment of beauty. Aphrodite, in their lore, transcended mere prettiness. She was the very essence of aesthetic perfection made manifest. Her radiant locks, catching the nascent light of dawn, shimmered like threads of pure, molten gold. Her skin possessed the flawless, unblemished smoothness of a pristine pearl, while her eyes mirrored the profound, cerulean depths of the summer ocean. Yet beyond her exquisite physical form, there emanated from Aphrodite a captivating aura that imbued everything in her vicinity with an enhanced loveliness. The effervescent spray of the sea that embraced her sparkled with the brilliance of countless diamonds. The mundane conches resting at her feet were instantaneously transformed into seemingly priceless jewels. Even the avian creatures soaring above appeared to execute their aerial ballets with an unprecedented grace whenever she was near. As the goddess of love took her inaugural step onto the sandy shore, a miraculous phenomenon unfolded. Vibrant flowers burst forth in her very footprints. These were not simply any blossoms, but roses, the most breathtakingly beautiful and intoxicatingly fragrant roses ever witnessed by mortal or immortal eyes. The very earth itself seemed to resonate with a joyous celebration of her divine arrival. However, a particularly intriguing aspect of this Genesis moment was Aphrodite's unique birthright. She emerged into existence fully developed, endowed with an inherent, comprehensive understanding of her identity and the full scope of her formidable powers. Unlike the arduous developmental journey of mortal infants, who must acquire all knowledge from inception, she instantly comprehended her divine status and recognized that her sacred domain encompassed love in its myriad, complex forms. And love, as Aphrodite swiftly discerned, was a far more intricate and multifaceted force than merely eliciting states of happiness in beings. Her initial observations were directed towards the profound impact her presence exerted upon the creatures surrounding her. A pair of dolphins, previously engaged in a casual swim near the coastline, spontaneously commenced an elaborate courtship ballet, leaping and spinning through the water with an astonishing, synchronized elegance. Two seagulls, hitherto embroiled in a contentious dispute over a captured fish, abruptly abandoned their quarrel, turning instead to affectionately preen each other's feathers. Even the botanical world responded perceptibly to her subtle influence. Vines that had been sprawling in disparate directions suddenly began to intertwine gracefully, their tendrils seeking mutual connection. Solitary trees, standing in isolated majesty, were observed to gently incline towards their nearest arboreal companions, as if yearning for fellowship. Yet Aphrodite also perceived a deeper, more pervasive phenomenon, the profound sense of loneliness that permeated the world. In the boundless ocean stretching behind her, she could discern the isolation of countless creatures navigating the immense, solitary depths. On the verdant land ahead, her senses attuned to animals and nature spirits who had never experienced the solace of genuine companionship. And most remarkably, she could even feel the intricate emotional currents of her fellow gods, despite having never encountered them directly. Distant yet distinct, she perceived Zeus's convoluted sentiments concerning power and the burdens of responsibility. She sensed Hera's perpetual internal struggle, a tempestuous oscillation between profound love and searing jealousy. She even detected the poignant solitude of Artemis, who, despite embracing a life of chosen isolation, occasionally pondered the experiences she might be foregoing. It was at this juncture that Aphrodite made a momentous decision, one destined to irrevocably shape the destinies of both gods and mortals for all eternity. She resolved that her divine purpose would extend beyond merely symbolizing love. She would actively cultivate and create opportunities for love to blossom and flourish. She commenced her grand endeavor on a modest scale, focusing on the creatures immediately within her sphere. She subtly encouraged the lone dolphins to seek out partners. She gently guided the solitary seabirds towards finding suitable mates. She even exerted a delicate influence over the ocean currents, orchestrating encounters between fish that had been swimming in isolated patterns. However, as she traversed the shoreline, exploring this nascent world into which she had been born, Aphrodite gradually began to comprehend that love was not invariably a straightforward blessing. She observed a pair of crabs engaged in a fierce territorial skirmish, and realized that the primal desire to safeguard what one cherishes could often ignite bitter conflict. She witnessed a mother bird aggressively warding off other avian intruders, who ventured too close to her carefully constructed nest, and thus understood that love frequently encompassed elements of possessiveness and protective jealousy. Most surprisingly, she discovered that her very presence could inadvertently precipitate complications. When she happened upon a group of young dolphins, they were all instantly captivated by her, abandoning their existing social bonds and following her with an almost hypnotic infatuation along the shore. This experience underscored the critical necessity for her to learn to regulate her potent influence, to wield it with deliberate thought rather than allowing it to indiscriminately affect every being in her proximity. This profound realization marked Aphrodite's inaugural lesson in the immense responsibility that accompanied her divine powers. Being the goddess of love did not simply entail orchestrating universal infatuation. It demanded an intricate understanding of the delicate equilibrium between desire and respect, between unbridled passion and profound wisdom, and between fostering connections while simultaneously honoring individual autonomy and the freedom of choice. As the sun ascended higher in the celestial dome, Aphrodite recognized the imperative to ascertain her place within the pantheon of other divine beings. She had been born with the innate awareness of their existence, immortal entities, each presiding over their own unique domains and possessed of distinct personalities. Yet she also understood with stark clarity that her arrival would inevitably alter the intricate dynamics of their established relationships in ways that no one, not even she, could foresee. After all, what transpires when the very goddess of love materializes within a divine family already burdened by its own complex web of intermingled relationships? What unfolds when a being endowed with the profound ability to influence emotions joins a formidable assembly of powerful entities who are not always adept at managing their own tumultuous feelings? Aphrodite stood poised at the ocean's edge, her gaze sweeping across the boundless sea that had cradled her birth, before turning to encompass the vast land where her new existence beckoned. The gentle breeze playfully teased her golden tresses, and around her feet, roses continued their miraculous bloom. She was undeniably beautiful, immensely powerful, and eternally immortal. Yet, in a profound sense, she was also utterly alone. She was sui generis, the sole being whose fundamental essence was love itself. How, then, does one forge genuine relationships when one's mere presence automatically sways the affections and sentiments of others? How does one ascertain if another truly cares for her, or if their feelings are simply an involuntary response to her inherent divine nature? These weighty questions were the silent companions Aphrodite carried with her as she embarked upon her initial steps away from the sea and towards the majestic heights of Mount Olympus, where the other gods awaited, unknowingly, the arrival of love incarnate. And perhaps these are profound questions with which humanity continues to grapple in the modern era. How do we effectively reconcile the innate desire to be loved with the fundamental need to remain authentic to our true selves? How can we truly discern when our feelings for another are genuine and deeply rooted, and when they are merely a superficial reaction to transient attractions? How do we extend love to others while steadfastly preserving our own distinct identity? These introspective inquiries concerning identity and authenticity serve as a poignant prelude to one of the most terrifying tribulations Zeus ever confronted. A colossal battle that severely tested not merely his formidable strength, but the very legitimacy of his claim to universal dominion. For sometimes, the The gravest threats do not emanate from familial treachery or intricate romantic entanglements, but rather from forces of pure, unadulterated, chaotic destruction. By this pivotal point in divine history, Zeus had triumphantly deposed his formidable father, Cronus, successfully liberated his siblings from their ghastly imprisonment within their father's stomach, and firmly established himself as the undisputed sovereign of the gods upon the hallowed peak of Mount Olympus. One might reasonably assume this would herald a period of tranquil repose for Zeus, allowing him to savor his hard-won victory. Instead, it was precisely then that Gaia, the primordial Earth herself, chose to rigorously test whether Zeus genuinely merited his newly acquired throne. You see, Gaia, the ancient Earth Mother, had endured countless eons observing her progeny and their descendants locked in relentless, intergenerational conflict. First, Uranus had displayed an abhorrent cruelty towards his own children. Subsequently, Cronus had violently overthrown Uranus. Now Zeus, with an equally brutal hand, had deposed Cronus. Gaia was utterly weary of this incessant cycle of divine familial violence, and she harbored a particularly deep resentment that Zeus had imprisoned many of her other beloved children, the mighty Titans, within the abyssal, lightless chasm of Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld. Consequently, Gaia resolved to forge a champion capable of vanquishing Zeus definitively. Her aim was not to install a new ruler in his stead, but rather to irrevocably shatter the destructive cycle of violent power struggles by utterly dismantling the very concept of divine kingship. She withdrew into the most profound, hidden caverns beneath the Earth's crust, where the very rock remained in a molten state, and the air shimmered with an intense, primeval heat. There, within a cavern illuminated solely by the eerie, pulsating glow of subterranean lava streams, Gaia commenced her most ambitious and terrifying creation to date. She meticulously gathered clay from the abyssal trenches of the deepest oceans, blended it with the searing fire from the Earth's molten core, and into this nascent form, she breathed all of her accumulated rage, her profound frustration, and her unyielding desire for a conclusive end to divine tyranny. What emerged from this cataclysmic birthing process was an entity unlike anything that had ever existed before, and hopefully would never again grace existence. His name was Typhon, and he was meticulously engineered to be the perfect anti-god, a living embodiment of divine opposition. Imagine the most colossal mountain you have ever beheld. Now, envision that immense peak capable of autonomous movement, possessing intellect, and brimming with an all-consuming hatred. Typhon was of such prodigious stature that when he stood erect, his monstrous head scraped against the distant stars. His eyes blazed with the terrifying intensity of miniature suns. In lieu of conventional hair, his scalp was covered by a writhing mass of venomous serpents, each one potent enough to deliver a fatal bite to 100 mortals. But perhaps his most utterly terrifying feature resided in his hands. From his elbows downwards, instead of ordinary arms and hands, Typhon possessed 100 monstrous dragon heads. Each individual head was capable of exhaling a distinct and devastating form of destruction. Some belched forth torrents of fire, others spewed noxious poison gas, while still others unleashed a freezing wind so intense it could instantly transmute living creatures into solid ice. When Typhon first heaved himself from the depths of the earth, his mere act of rising to full height triggered cataclysmic earthquakes that reverberated across the entirety of the known world. His thunderous roar, which issued not just from his primary mouth, but simultaneously from all 100 of his dragon-headed hands, was of such an unimaginable volume that it shattered formidable mountain ranges and instigated devastating avalanches thousands of miles away from his point of emergence. The initial appearance of Typhon, as witnessed by the Olympian gods on their celestial mountain, did not provoke a courageous stand, but rather an immediate and frantic retreat. These were not minor deities. These were the very same divine beings who had previously engaged in epic conflicts with the formidable Titans, who commanded the awesome forces of lightning, who orchestrated the tremors of the earth, and who held sway over the abyssal depths of the underworld itself. Yet Typhon presented an entirely different magnitude of threat. He was not merely endowed with immense power. He was, in essence, the very embodiment of unbridled chaos, an agent of destruction for its own malevolent purpose, presaging the utter annihilation of all that the gods had laboriously constructed and cherished. In a swift and unceremonious exodus, each Olympian deity sought refuge in the distant lands of Egypt, where they ingeniously adopted animal forms to elude the piercing and relentless scrutiny of Typhon. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, metamorphosed into a shimmering fish, gliding through the waters. Apollo, the radiant god of music and light, assumed the guise of a watchful crow, soaring high above. Artemis, the huntress and mistress of the wild, transformed into a sleek and agile cat. Even the formidable Ares, the tempestuous god of war, abandoned his martial bearing to become a wild boar, seeking concealment in the most remote corners of the sprawling Nile Delta. However, Zeus, the undisputed king of the gods, stood apart from his fleeing brethren. He did not join their desperate flight. It was not, as the ancient narratives unequivocally state, because he was impervious to fear. Indeed, Zeus was gripped by profound terror at the prospect of confronting Typhon. His resolve stemmed instead from a singular understanding that eluded the other gods. He comprehended that if he were to abandon this pivotal confrontation, if he permitted Typhon to raze Mount Olympus and obliterate their entire civilization, then Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother, would have achieved her ultimate objective. The glorious epic of the gods would draw to a close, and the cosmos would revert to an untamed primeval state of disorder. Therefore, Zeus, solitary and resolute, positioned himself on the highest, most exposed peak of Mount Olympus, his potent thunderbolts crackling with raw energy in his grasp, patiently awaiting the monstrous arrival of Typhon. The ensuing battle, when it finally erupted, transcended anything previously witnessed in the annals of the world. Zeus unleashed a relentless barrage of lightning bolts at Typhon, each incandescent flash brilliant enough to momentarily blind mortal eyes, and each deafening roar powerful enough to reverberate across continents. Yet Typhon appeared to register these colossal impacts with little more than a passing acknowledgement. While the furious electrical discharges etched searing scorch marks upon his formidable rocky hide, they utterly failed to impede his inexorable advance. Concurrently, Typhon's 100 grotesque dragon heads spewed forth their diverse and devastating forms of destruction upon Zeus, flames so intense they could instantly liquefy solid bronze, a noxious poison that withered all plant life for miles around, and an extreme cold capable of freezing the very air itself. Zeus was compelled to employ every ounce of his legendary speed and agility merely to avoid utter annihilation within the initial, brutal minutes of their engagement. The titanic struggle raged on for days, then extended into weeks. The ceaseless peals of Zeus's thunderous lightning and the reverberating roars emanating from Typhon's many heads conspired to generate cataclysmic storms that inundated entire geographical regions. The intense thermal energy radiating from their fierce combat melted the snowcaps on distant, towering mountains. The very crust of the earth fractured and rent asunder under the immense force of their clashes. Nevertheless, Zeus gradually began to grasp a critical realization. He could not secure victory in this epic confrontation through sheer brute force alone. Typhon was simply too overwhelmingly powerful, too incredibly resilient, too utterly saturated with destructive energy. Each time Zeus believed he had gained a momentary advantage, Typhon would unleash some novel and terrifying form of assault that inexorably forced the king of the gods back into a defensive posture. It was at this critical juncture that Zeus recalled an ancient piece of wisdom his grandmother, Gaia, had imparted to him long ago, in a time before their relationship had soured into enmity. She had spoken of the earth itself as a boundless fount of strength, but also as a force that could be deftly manipulated against those who sought to desecrate and destroy, rather than to nurture and protect. Consequently, instead of persisting in his attempts to utterly obliterate Typhon, Zeus embarked upon a radically different strategy. He began to wield his formidable lightning not as instruments of direct harm, but rather as precision tools. He directed his bolts to strike the ground in the vicinity of Typhon, not aiming to wound the colossal monster directly, but instead triggering immense rock slides and devastating avalanches. Initially, this unconventional tactic appeared utterly ineffectual. Typhon effortlessly pulverized the cascading rocks, treating them as if they were mere pebbles. However, Zeus persisted with unwavering determination, continuing his bombardment, relentlessly instigating landslides and steadfastly piling stone upon stone. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the accumulated detritus began to amass around Typhon's massive feet. It demanded another full week of unremitting lightning strikes from Zeus, but eventually, he succeeded in burying Typhon up to his waist in a colossal mound of loose rock and geological debris. The monstrous entity continued its furious struggle, still exhaling its destructive breath from its numerous dragon heads. But its mobility had been irrevocably curtailed. It was then that Zeus executed his final, desperate maneuver. Instead of attempting to slay Typhon outright, an endeavor which might have proven utterly impossible, Zeus employed his formidable dominion over earthquakes to cleave open the very earth beneath the now immobile monster. Then, with a lightning strike of unparalleled intensity, more potent than any he had ever conjured, he caused an entire mountain to collapse directly onto Typhon. The colossal peak that ultimately entombed Typhon was none other than Mount Etna. And according to the venerable traditions of the ancient Greeks, Typhon remains imprisoned beneath its immense weight to this very day. Each time the volcano erupts, they recounted, it is a testament to Typhon's enduring presence below, still seething with rage, still exhaling fire, and still desperately striving to break free from his subterranean confinement. Yet, what renders this ancient narrative particularly compelling is its underlying theme. Zeus achieved his triumph not by being demonstrably stronger than Typhon, but by exercising superior intellect and strategic acumen. He prevailed by embracing patience over brute force, by engaging in thoughtful planning rather than merely intensifying his combat efforts. When the other gods eventually emerged from their Egyptian hiding places and discovered Zeus, exhausted but undeniably victorious amidst the ravaged landscape, they collectively inquired how he had managed to vanquish a being that had instilled such profound terror in all of them. Zeus's response was remarkably succinct and profound. I did not defeat him by possessing greater power. I defeated him by remembering what I was fighting for. And perhaps this profound lesson resonates far beyond the confines of ancient mythology, finding echoes in the challenges of our own lives. There are instances when the most formidable obstacles we encounter cannot be overcome by simply exerting more effort or by attempting to become physically stronger. Sometimes these situations demand that we pause, engage in careful introspection, and reconnect with what truly holds significance for us. This profound concept of remembering the true purpose of our struggles now transports us to the realm of one of the most celebrated heroes in the entirety of Greek mythology, and to a tale that illustrates how, at times, the most crucial battles are waged not against monstrous creatures, but against the very systems and ideologies that create such monsters in the first place. Let us now journey from the elevated domain of the gods to the more grounded world of mortals, specifically to the enchanting island of Crete, where the sagacious King Minos reigned with both wisdom and immense wealth, yet harbored a dreadful secret concealed beneath the foundations of his opulent palace. This chilling secret bore the name of the Labyrinth, and it stood as the most intricate and bewildering maze ever conceived by human ingenuity. Masterfully designed by the legendary craftsman Daedalus, it comprised a vast subterranean network of winding corridors, inescapable dead ends, and deceptive false passages, so utterly perplexing that any unfortunate soul who ventured within would become hopelessly disoriented and lost within mere minutes. And at the very heart of this bewildering labyrinth resided a creature that ought never to have existed, a terrifying entity known as the Minotaur. Now, the Minotaur's own tragic genesis was itself a poignant narrative of divine retribution and its dire human repercussions. King Minos had, at one point, incurred the wrath of the sea god Poseidon, and Poseidon's vengeful reprisal had manifested in the form of a curse, compelling Minos' wife to fall hopelessly in love with a sacred bull. From this unnatural and abhorrent union, the Minotaur was born, a creature possessing the formidable physique of a powerful man, but crowned with the fearsome head of a bull, endowed with human-like intelligence, yet driven by an insatiable bestial hunger. King Minos, consumed by shame and profound horror at this living embodiment of his family's curse, had commissioned Daedalus to construct the labyrinth specifically as a prison for this monstrous offspring. The Minotaur was thus condemned to perpetual confinement, unable to escape, yet also incapable of dying, forever denied peace, and destined to remain nothing more than a grotesque monster trapped in an eternal, suffocating darkness. But it is at this juncture that the narrative plunges into even deeper depths of tragedy. In order to satiate the Minotaur's ravenous appetite, King Minos had imposed a horrific and tyrannical tribute upon the distant city of Athens. Every 7 years, Athens was forcibly compelled to dispatch 7 vigorous young men and 7 innocent young women to Crete, where they would be mercilessly thrust into the tortuous labyrinth, destined to be hunted down and devoured by the monstrous Minotaur. One can only begin to imagine the profound anguish and terror this decree inflicted upon Athenian families. With each passing cycle of 7 years, 14 families would be irrevocably shattered, their beloved children sacrificed to this unspeakable fate. The unfortunate victims were selected through a cruel lottery system, which meant that every family with young members lived under a perpetual cloud of dread, never knowing if their son or daughter might be the next to be chosen for this ghastly demise. It was into this harrowing and seemingly intractable situation that our intrepid hero, Theseus, boldly stepped forward. Theseus was, in fact, the son of King Aegeus of Athens, but he had spent his formative years far removed from the grandeur of the royal palace, having been raised by his mother in a quiet coastal town. He had only recently arrived in Athens, and by chance discovered his true royal lineage. Thus, when the time arrived for the third horrifying tribute to be dispatched to Crete, Theseus was witnessing this profound tragedy for the very first time. He observed with mounting horror as the 14 young Athenians were arbitrarily selected by lot. He saw the inconsolable weeping of their families, the resigned despair etched into the eyes of the young victims themselves. He listened as the older citizens, weary with years of suffering, explained that this was simply the unchangeable order of things, that there was no conceivable point in attempting to defy King Minos and his monstrous creation. However, Theseus, possessing the unblemished idealism of youth and not yet jaded by years of passively accepting the unacceptable, posed a remarkably simple yet revolutionary question. Why do we not simply refuse to send the tribute? The answer, he quickly learned, was stark and undeniable. King Minos's formidable navy was overwhelmingly powerful. Should Athens dare to defy the tribute, Minos would undoubtedly unleash his fleet, invade, and utterly obliterate the city entirely. It was, the elders argued, a grim necessity to sacrifice 14 young lives every 7 years, rather than risk the complete destruction of the entire populace. This cold, pragmatic logic failed to satisfy Theseus in the slightest. Instead, he made an announcement that sent shockwaves through everyone present, including his own father. He declared that he would volunteer to be one of the 14 tributes, and furthermore, he would personally slay the Minotaur. King Aegeus was utterly horrified. He had only recently been reunited with his long-lost son, and now Theseus seemed intent on recklessly throwing his life away on what appeared to be an utterly impossible endeavor. Dozens of young people had already been consigned to the labyrinth over the preceding years, and not a single one had ever re-emerged. Many of them had been highly trained warriors, what gave Theseus the audacious belief that he could succeed where all of them had so tragically failed. Theseus's profound response to the perilous undertaking provided a significant insight into his intrinsic nature. He declared with resolute conviction, "Perhaps I cannot guarantee the Minotaur's demise, but I can certainly ensure that I am the final individual to perish in the attempt." This statement underscored a strategic foresight that distinguished Theseus. His meticulously crafted design extended far beyond a mere confrontation with the monstrous beast. For a considerable period, he had immersed himself in comprehensive research, delving into every known detail concerning the intricate labyrinth. He had diligently engaged with Daedalus's former pupils, extracting invaluable knowledge regarding the elaborate construction and bewildering configuration of the maze. His astute conclusion was that the true formidable obstacle lay not in vanquishing the Minotaur itself, but in successfully extricating oneself from the labyrinthine confines subsequent to the creature's defeat. Thus, upon the arrival of the vessel conveying the 14 unfortunate tributes to the shores of Crete, Theseus was equipped with more than just conventional armaments. He carried a seemingly innocuous, yet profoundly significant, ball of thread. However, prior to delving into the renowned stratagem of the thread, an equally crucial, yet frequently disregarded segment of this epic narrative demands attention. As Theseus meticulously readied himself for the impending confrontation with the fearsome Minotaur, his presence inadvertently captivated an unforeseen observer, Ariadne, the regal daughter of the formidable King Minos. Ariadne had spent her entire formative years acutely aware of the terrifying Minotaur, intimately familiar with the gruesome tribute demanded, and profoundly conscious of the young individuals who vanished into the impenetrable labyrinth with chilling regularity every 7 years. Yet, despite her lifelong knowledge, she had never before encountered any of the ill-fated victims. These doomed youths were invariably sequestered from the royal household, meticulously shielded from any interaction with the ruling family, and tragically regarded less as fellow human beings and more as mere sacrificial offerings destined for an inescapable doom. The pivotal encounter with Theseus irrevocably altered Ariadne's perspective. For the very first time, she stood in direct proximity to an individual on the precipice of being consumed by the monstrous creature her own family sustained. Crucially, in stark contrast to the despairing resignation displayed by previous victims, Theseus harbored no such acceptance of his grim destiny. Instead, he was actively formulating a robust strategy for resistance. This profound realization ignited a searing moral quandary within Ariadne's conscience. She possessed the means to preserve Theseus's life by assisting him in traversing the perilous twists and turns of the labyrinth. However, such an act would unequivocally signify an act of profound disloyalty towards her formidable father, King Minos, and could potentially imperil her entire lineage should her clandestine betrayal ever come to light. Ultimately, Ariadne reached a decision that would indelibly shape the trajectory of her existence. She concluded with unwavering conviction that certain societal structures and practices were inherently too abhorrent to countenance, even if actively opposing them necessitated the forfeiture of every comfort and familiarity she had ever known. During the clandestine hours preceding Theseus's fated entry into the formidable labyrinth, Ariadne, under the cloak of darkness, surreptitiously sought him out in his confined cell. She presented him with a most extraordinary artifact, a gift originally bestowed upon her by the ingenious architect Daedalus himself, a miraculous ball of enchanted thread. This remarkable filament possessed the inherent property of infallibly guiding its user back to its initial point of attachment, irrespective of the labyrinthine depths to which it was unspooled. Secure one extremity firmly at the entrance, she softly imparted, her voice barely a whisper. Allow it to unravel progressively as you venture further into the intricate pathways of the maze. Once you have vanquished the monstrous entity, simply retrace your steps by following the thread back to liberation. Yet, her invaluable contribution extended beyond this tangible aid. She also furnished him with an unparalleled trove of detailed intelligence concerning the Minotaur's specific behaviors and inherent vulnerabilities, insights that could only be possessed by someone intimately acquainted with the palace's inner workings. The formidable beast, she revealed, exhibited its peak strength during the daylight hours, yet its movements became noticeably lethargic under the shroud of night. Furthermore, while its vision was severely impaired, its olfactory senses were exceptionally acute. Possessing a rudimentary cunning, it was capable of devising rudimentary ambushes, but its overwhelming pride meant that a direct, audacious challenge would invariably compel it to abandon calculated strategy in favor of unrestrained, brutal force. As the dawn broke on the subsequent morning, Theseus resolutely stepped into the treacherous confines of the labyrinth. He was equipped not only with Ariadne's providentially provided thread and her invaluable strategic intelligence, but also burdened with the collective aspirations and fervent prayers of every soul who had ever suffered a loss to the unyielding cruelty of King Minos's oppressive system. The labyrinthine structure proved to be even more bewildering and psychologically disorienting than his extensive preparations had led him to anticipate. Its ancient, formidable walls were intricately chiseled with deceptive portals and enigmatic, misleading glyphs, designed specifically to confound and entrap. The winding corridors twisted, bifurcated, and then inexplicably looped back upon themselves in patterns that utterly defied any rational comprehension. Even with the reassuring guidance of the magical thread intended to ensure his return, Theseus found himself increasingly perplexed regarding his true orientation and the precise direction of his progress. Nevertheless, he persevered with unwavering resolve, penetrating ever deeper into the heart of the perplexing maze, guided by the faint, rhythmic sound of the Minotaur's respiration and the increasingly potent, chilling aroma of desiccated bones mingled with primal terror. Upon his eventual arrival at the very epicenter of the labyrinth, Theseus discovered himself within a vast, circular antechamber, illuminated by a solitary, ethereal beam of sunlight that descended from an immense height above. And there, reposing amidst a gruesome mound of human skeletal remains, lay the Minotaur. Its physical stature was notably more diminutive than Theseus had initially envisioned, yet paradoxically, it possessed an unsettlingly more human aspect. The creature's formidable physique resembled that of an exceptionally potent man, bearing the indelible marks and scars of countless past skirmishes, yet still exhibiting a surprising fluidity and grace in its dormant state. Only its colossal head was truly an embodiment of the monstrous, a gigantic bull's head, crowned with formidable horns honed to a terrifying sharpness, capable of effortlessly penetrating even the stoutest bronze armor. For a fleeting interval, Theseus experienced a profound moment of contemplative pause. This being before him was not merely a monstrous entity, it was, in a tragic sense, also a victim itself. A creature that had never been granted the agency to choose its own abhorrent existence, condemned instead to perpetual confinement within an abyssal darkness, sustained by an abhorrent sustenance of unwilling human sacrifices. However, Theseus swiftly recalled the countless young lives that had been brutally extinguished within this very chamber, and the stark realization solidified within him, extending clemency to the Minotaur would unequivocally translate into the perpetual demise of innumerable innocent lives yet to come. The ensuing confrontation, while concluding with a surprising swiftness, was by no means rendered less arduous. The Minotaur engaged in combat with the ferocious, untamed desperation characteristic of a creature that had been unjustly confined for an excessively prolonged period. Yet, Theseus countered with the unwavering resolve of an individual who bore the immense weight of collective hopes, the aspirations of every soul who had ever been brutally sacrificed to perpetuate an inherently inequitable regime. Once the harrowing struggle had concluded, Theseus meticulously retraced his path, guided by Ariadne's infallible thread, navigating through the bewildering, serpentine passages back towards the labyrinth's entrance. In his wake, he led the remaining 13 Athenian tributes, who had been anxiously lingering near the threshold, barely allowing themselves the fragile luxury of anticipating such an improbable deliverance. However, the compelling narrative of Theseus does not culminate with his triumphant egress from the island of Crete, for the act of vanquishing the monstrous Minotaur represented merely the nascent phase in the arduous process of fundamentally transforming the oppressive societal framework that had, in fact, engendered the very existence of such a creature. And therein, perhaps, resides the most profound and enduring moral insight bequeathed by this ancient saga. True valor at times is not primarily demonstrated in the direct confrontation with a terrifying beast. Rather, it manifests in the steadfast commitment to the protracted, demanding endeavor of meticulously constructing a world where the conditions that necessitate such monstrous manifestations are utterly eradicated for a fleeting instant. Envision the most extraordinarily peculiar cephalalgia ever recorded throughout the annals of cosmic existence. One might awaken on a given morn to a cranial pressure so intense it suggests an imminent rupture. Yet, when one is Zeus, the preeminent sovereign of the Olympian pantheon, such somatic discomforts are, by their very nature, far from mundane. This specific morning, unfolding upon the hallowed peaks of Mount Olympus, commenced with a seemingly ordinary tranquility. Helios, the resplendent sun god, was just embarking upon his celestial journey, steering his magnificent chariot across the vast expanse of the firmament, thereby imbuing the majestic marble pillars of the grand palace with a tender golden luminescence. Zeus himself had been restlessly traversing the expansive corridors of his divine abode, one powerful hand firmly pressed against his aching forehead, striving to comprehend the enigmatic and increasingly potent sensation that had relentlessly intensified over several preceding days. Indeed, several months prior to this peculiar affliction, Zeus had been burdened with a deeply unsettling prophetic utterance. The Fates, those archaic, enigmatic sororal deities who meticulously spun the intricate threads of preordained destiny, had murmured a foretelling that compelled even the formidable Lord of Thunder to momentarily halt his eternal reign. Their pronouncement declared that Metis, his initial consort and the revered goddess personifying sagacity and prudent counsel, was destined to conceive and bear a progeny who would, in due course, usurp his supreme authority, mirroring the very manner in which Zeus himself had deposed his own tyrannical father, Cronus. Zeus, ever true to his formidable and often ruthless nature, had then enacted a measure that, at the time, appeared entirely rational, though it strikes contemporary sensibilities as utterly bizarre. He had, with decisive intent, consumed Metis in her entirety, under the conviction that this drastic act would unequivocally thwart the fulfillment of the ominous prophecy. However, the very essence of wisdom, as events demonstrably proved, is not an attribute that can be so readily confined or suppressed. Even within the very being of Zeus, Metis persisted in nurturing their burgeoning offspring, and this extraordinary child ceaselessly continued its development, acquiring knowledge and maturing within the most unconventional and utterly unimaginable of nurseries. For an extended period of months, Zeus perceived the distinct sensations of the child's movements, its burgeoning thoughts, and even its industrious crafting activities taking place within the confines of his own cranium. One might justifiably ponder the peculiar sensation of experiencing an entity meticulously constructing objects within the intimate confines of one skull. The rhythmic clink of diminutive hammers striking metallic surfaces resonated unceasingly throughout Zeus's divine consciousness, both by day and by night. The nascent deity, it became evident, was already engaged in purposeful labor, already manifesting creative endeavors, and already meticulously preparing for its imminent emergence into the external world. On this particular morning, however, the internal sensation had escalated to an utterly intolerable degree of intensity. Zeus, in his acute distress, summoned Hephaestus, the divine master of pyrotechnics and intricate metallurgy, who was also his revered progeny. Hephaestus promptly presented himself at the grand palace, his formidable bronze axe still radiating warmth from the recent heat of the forge, with dark smudges of soot adorning his powerful muscular arms. He arrived in a state of mild perplexity, pondering the reason for his illustrious father's urgent summons. "My head," Zeus articulated with a terse simplicity that conveyed the entirety of his torment, and Hephaestus, with an innate understanding characteristic of the gods, immediately grasped the profound implication. Divine beings possess an inherent faculty for comprehending complex situations without the necessity of protracted explanations. Indeed, Hephaestus had long harbored a premonition of this very day, having even envisioned its arrival within the contemplative solitude of his workshop during tranquil afternoons, when the only discernible sounds were the rhythmic, resonant clangs of hammer against anvil. Together, they ascended to the most elevated eyrie of the opulent palace, where the crisp morning air was refreshingly attenuated and pristinely clear. Far beneath them, the realm of mortal existence unfolded in its customary daily rhythms. Diligent cultivators inspected their verdant olive groves. Industrious fishermen meticulously repaired their intricate nets, and joyous children engaged in boisterous play within sun-drenched, dusty courtyards. Not a single one of these unsuspecting earthly inhabitants possessed the slightest inkling that they were, albeit unknowingly, poised on the brink of witnessing the miraculous genesis of a formidable goddess. Hephaestus, with a solemn gravity befitting the momentous occasion, elevated his mighty axe. Then, with a singular, exquisitely precise, and scrupulously measured blow, he deftly cleaved open the very forehead of Zeus. The ensuing spectacle was of such unparalleled and breathtaking magnitude that even the other deities, who had long been privy to a myriad of astonishing and inexplicable phenomena, abruptly ceased their ongoing colloquies and gazed in collective, profound astonishment. From the very cranium of Zeus, there materialized a fully mature woman, already resplendent in lustrous armor that appeared to have been meticulously forged from the very essence of starlight itself. Her magnificent helmet captured the nascent rays of the morning sun, reflecting them back in dazzling, brilliant effulgence. Her formidable spear was held in impeccable equilibrium, and her shield gleamed with a mirror-like brilliance. This was Athena, the venerable goddess of both profound wisdom and strategic warfare. Brought into existence not as a vulnerable, helpless infant, but as a perfectly complete and self-possessed entity, entirely prepared to assume her rightful and prominent station among the divine assembly. Yet, what rendered this epical instant even more profoundly extraordinary was the very first action undertaken by the newly born Athena. It was not to utter a sound or to make a grand gesture, but rather to engage in profound contemplation. This intellectual process was visibly evident in her luminous gray eyes, which absorbed every facet of her surroundings with an acute and meticulous discernment. She critically scrutinized the intricate architectural design of the palace, discerning the precise spacing of its majestic columns and comprehending the underlying rationale. She observed the mesmerizing interplay of light as it traversed the polished marble floors, instantly grasping the complex mathematical principles that governed its movement. When at last she chose to articulate, her voice resonated with an impressive calm and measured authority. "Father," she addressed Zeus, "I now fully comprehend the profound reason for my secure gestation within the sanctuary of your thoughts. The world, I perceive, holds an abundance of vital work that requires diligent execution." Zeus, gently caressing his now miraculously healed forehead, responded with a smile that conveyed a potent blend of profound relief and immense paternal pride. The captivating narrative surrounding Athena's emergence profoundly illustrates the paramount values cherished by the ancient Greeks. Her genesis was not rooted in the tempestuous throes of passion, nor was it the product of mere happenstance. Rather, she sprang forth directly from the realm of pure intellect. She materialized in a state of complete and flawless maturity, a symbolic representation of how genuine wisdom does not unfold in gradual increments. Instead, it manifests in its entirety, poised and prepared to confront any exigencies that may arise. During the subsequent days, Athena embarked on an exploration of the majestic Mount Olympus. Her journey was marked by an inquisitive spirit, akin to one encountering the world for the very first time, yet simultaneously imbued with the profound comprehension of someone who had long pondered its intricacies. She sought out Hephaestus within the confines of his bustling forge, immersing herself in the intricacies of crafting and construction, swiftly grasping the principles of form and function. Furthermore, she engaged in discourse with Apollo concerning the ethereal domains of music and poetry, instantly discerning the symbiotic relationship between rhythm and meter that coalesces to forge aesthetic beauty. Nevertheless, it was the bustling realm of mortal existence far below that most compellingly captured her attention. From her elevated celestial vantage point, she could discern burgeoning cities grappling with the fundamental challenges of self-organization, their inhabitants striving to resolve complex issues of jurisprudence and governance, while dedicated artisans tirelessly endeavored to refine their respective crafts. It became unequivocally clear that this earthly sphere was precisely where her profound sagacity was most urgently required. The inaugural urban settlement Athena elected to assist was one destined to bear her illustrious name, Athens. Its citizenry found themselves embroiled in earnest deliberations concerning the optimal structuring of their society, wrestling with the methodologies required to establish equitable decision-making processes for all. Athena observed their protracted discussions with keen interest, noting the profound difficulties they encountered in addressing dilemmas that appeared to defy straightforward resolutions. She presented herself to them, not as an imposing, conquering divinity, but rather as an approachable pedagogue within the city's bustling central agora. There, she meticulously demonstrated the refined arts of pottery, the intricate skill of weaving, and the patient practice of olive cultivation. These were not arbitrarily chosen proficiencies. Each discipline encapsulated a distinct facet of wisdom. Pottery imparted the virtue of patience and the understanding that objects of enduring utility could be sculpted from the most unassuming earth. Weaving elucidated how disparate individual threads, when methodically arranged and interconnected, could coalesce to form a fabric far more robust and aesthetically pleasing than any solitary strand. And the cultivation of olive trees exemplified foresight and long-term strategic thinking, given that these venerable trees demand many years to reach maturity, yet subsequently provide sustenance and valuable oil for countless generations. The denizens of Athens assimilated these invaluable lessons with remarkable aptitude. They began to perceive their metropolis not merely as a geographical location where they coincidentally resided, but rather as a dynamic entity they possessed the capacity to sculpt and elevate through diligent intellectual effort and persistent labor. Consequently, they innovated novel governmental frameworks, devised enlightened approaches to collective decision-making, and instituted progressive educational methodologies that prioritized lucid, analytical problem-solving. It is particularly noteworthy how Athena's benevolent influence permeated beyond the confines of Athens. Other burgeoning city-states, having heard whispers of the profound wisdom being cultivated and practiced in the Athenian polis, dispatched their own erudite representatives to learn firsthand. These visiting emissaries would subsequently return to their homelands, enriched with groundbreaking concepts concerning architectural design, methods for organizing intricate societies, and enlightened strategies for resolving contentious disputes through reasoned discourse rather than outright aggression. Yet, Athena consistently refrained from claiming personal credit for these widespread advancements. Whenever individuals expressed their gratitude, she would humbly articulate that the inherent wisdom had resided within them all along. Her role, she explained, had merely been to assist them in structuring their latent thoughts, much in the same manner that her own divine birth had served as a catalyst for organizing Zeus's disparate ideas into a coherent and purposeful manifestation. As one prepares for slumber, it is perhaps fitting to contemplate that pivotal instant of Athena's birth. It serves as a potent reminder of how, at times, the most significant revelations and advancements do not originate from external sources, but rather from the disciplined organization of the innate capacities and knowledge one already possesses. One might ponder the multitude of nascent ideas currently incubating within one's own consciousness, awaiting the opportune moment to emerge in a fully articulated form. What profound insights might an individual uncover tomorrow? Insights that have been quietly maturing in the background of their mind, poised to illuminate their understanding of the world with newfound clarity. Expanding upon that profound consideration of wisdom and the true essence of what humanity values, the narrative now shifts to the compelling account of a monarch who harbored the conviction that he understood precisely what he desired, only to tragically discover that the fulfillment of one's deepest aspirations is not invariably the blessing one initially conceives it to be. King Midas presided over Phrygia, a kingdom gracefully situated in the region presently identified as Turkey, where undulating hills were adorned with verdant olive groves and flourishing vineyards. His regal palace commanded panoramic vistas of expansive valleys, through which shepherds meticulously guided their flocks along ancient, well-trodden pathways, and industrious merchants traversed dusty thoroughfares, transporting valuable commodities from distant territories. It was, by all accounts, a tranquil and sufficiently prosperous dominion. Yet Midas frequently found himself gazing upon his burgeoning treasury, a gnawing dissatisfaction compelling him to yearn for even greater riches. Indeed, Midas had cultivated what could accurately be termed an obsessive habit of enumeration. Each morning, following his customary repast of honey cakes and fresh goat's milk, he would descend the worn stone steps leading to his private treasure chamber. There, he would meticulously run his fingers through towering piles of shimmering silver coins, lift lustrous golden goblets to capture and refract the ambient lamplight, and arrange precious gemstones into perfectly aligned rows. The rhythmic, delicate clicking sounds emanating from the metallic and crystalline objects became for him a curious form of auditory delight, the very symphony of opulence. However, wealth, as Midas gradually discerned, possesses a peculiar and insidious characteristic. The more one accumulates, the more acutely one becomes aware of what remains beyond one's grasp. His treasury, which had once appeared magnificently replete, began to feel disappointingly meager when juxtaposed against the fabled riches attributed to other powerful kingdoms. He had absorbed tales of Egyptian pharaohs whose sepulchres overflowed with gold, of Persian monarchs whose crowns were embellished with gems the size of avian eggs, and of influential merchants who commanded entire fleets of vessels laden with an untold bounty of treasures. One particularly balmy afternoon, as Midas ambled through his fragrant rose garden, seeking to disencumber his mind of these persistent golden reveries, he detected an unusual disturbance near the garden's ornamental fountain. His vigilant guards had discovered an individual slumbering amidst the rose bushes, an elderly man whose hair was entangled with leaves and whose unassuming tunic bore the telltale stains of wine. This was Silenus, a jovial satyr and an esteemed companion to the venerable god Dionysus. Silenus, it appeared, had indulged a touch too ardently in the previous night's revelries, and had inadvertently strayed from Dionysus's boisterous procession, eventually succumbing to sleep within the serene confines of Midas's garden. Most monarchs might have reacted with considerable displeasure upon finding an uninvited stranger within their private domains. But Midas, intrigued by this unconventional visitor, displayed a rare curiosity. For a span of 10 days, Midas extended to Silenus the courtesies befitting an honored guest. They partook of meals together on the palace terrace, observing in companionable silence as the setting sun painted the distant mountain ranges in resplendent hues of gold and purple. Silenus regaled his host with captivating anecdotes of his peregrinations with Dionysus, recounting vibrant tales of grand festivals in far-off cities, of vineyards that yielded wines so exquisitely sweet they could move mortals to tears of joy, and of celebrations that continued unabated from one new moon to the next. What most profoundly resonated with Midas in these enthralling narratives was their consistent focus not on the acquisition of material possessions, but rather on the profound experience of transient moments. Silenus spoke of idyllic evenings when the harmonious blend of music and laughter seemed to elevate individuals above their mundane concerns, of simple repasts rendered magical by the warmth of shared companionship, and of dances that persisted until the early dawn because no one wished for the exhilarating joy to cease. When Dionysus eventually arrived to reclaim his esteemed companion, He was so profoundly gratified by King Midas's exceptional hospitality that he magnanimously offered the monarch any boon he might desire. "Anything at all," Dionysus declared, his eyes sparkling with that particular brand of mischievous amusement that deities occasionally exhibit when they anticipate mortals are on the verge of making intriguing misjudgments. Without the slightest hesitation, Midas articulated his fervent wish: "Grant me the power that everything I touch transforms into gold." Dionysus subtly raised an eyebrow, inquiring if Midas was unequivocally certain that this was his true desire. The king responded with an enthusiastic nod, his mind already conjuring vivid images of the immense weight of golden coinage, the dazzling gleam of gilded statuary, and the boundless, shimmering wealth that would imminently be his. Dionysus bestowed the coveted wish with a gesture that appeared almost nonchalant, as if merely brushing away an inconsequential insect. "It is done," he stated with simple finality. Subsequently, he and Silenus departed, leaving Midas in solitary contemplation of his newfound, formidable power. The initial trial of his extraordinary ability was a modest one. Midas extended his hand and made contact with a delicate rose from his meticulously cultivated garden. Instantly, the soft, velvety petals became rigidly hard, gleaming with the unmistakable luster of gold. The metamorphosis, in its own peculiar way, possessed a certain beauty. Every intricate detail of the blossom was impeccably preserved. Every subtle curve of every petal was encased in precious metal. However, the rose no longer exuded its sweet fragrance. It no longer swayed gently in the soft breeze. It had been transformed into a perfect, albeit lifeless, replica of its former self. Despite this subtle loss, Midas was utterly exhilarated. He proceeded to traverse his palace, touching every object within his reach. Ordinary chairs became magnificent golden chairs. Simple curtains were transmuted into opulent golden draperies. Even the very flagstones beneath his feet turned to gold with each step he took. By the advent of evening, his entire palace presented an appearance reminiscent of a fantastical dreamscape, with everything gleaming, everything precious, everything now valued beyond the riches of entire kingdoms. The unforeseen complications, however, began to manifest at the evening meal. Midas, feeling utterly exhausted from his day of relentless golden transformation, settled down to dine. He reached for a plump grape, and it instantaneously solidified into hard gold within his grasp. He attempted to quaff some wine, but it congealed into a metallic, inert liquid the moment it made contact with his lips. Bread, luscious honey, even pure water, everything he attempted to consume became unpalatable gold the instant his touch made contact. That inaugural night, Midas lay within his golden bed, surrounded by golden pillows, gazing up at his golden ceiling, his stomach racked with the agonizing pangs of hunger. The profound irony of his predicament was not lost upon him. He was, by all measures, arguably the wealthiest man in the entire world. Yet he found himself utterly unable to afford the simple sustenance of a basic meal. But the ultimate and most profound heartbreak arrived the following morning, when his beloved daughter, Zoe, hastened to greet him, as was her cherished daily custom. She was the very epitome of his pride and joy, a vibrant 10-year-old who infused the entire palace with her infectious laughter and an endless stream of inquisitive questions about every facet of her world. Without a moment's thought, Midas instinctively reached out to embrace her, just as he always had. The transformation was instantaneous and tragically irreversible. One fleeting moment, Zoe was sprinting towards him, her countenance radiant with the innocent joy of the morning, and the very next, she had become a flawless golden statue, forever frozen in mid-stride. Her expression of happy anticipation was preserved with exquisite fidelity. Yet she could no longer utter a single word, no longer emit her delightful laughter, no longer pose the countless questions that had, to Midas, brought more profound delight than any treasure he had ever amassed. Midas collapsed to his knees alongside his daughter's auric effigy. Grief-stricken tears coursed down his face as a profound realization dawned upon him regarding what he had irrevocably sacrificed. All the gold in the world, he understood, now held no value in contrast with Zoe's tender touch in his, her sweet voice calling, "Good morning, Papa," or her vivacious prattle about the birds she'd glimpsed from her chamber window. The distraught monarch endured 72 hours sitting beside his child's statue, deprived of nourishment and restful slumber, perpetually haunted by the sound of his own footsteps reverberating through corridors that had become resplendent, yet utterly devoid of vitality. Every object upon which his gaze fell served as a constant, agonizing memento of his profound forfeiture. The golden roses would never unfurl their petals. The gilded fruit trees could offer neither shelter nor nourishment. His opulent palace had transmuted into a magnificent tomb. Finally, Midas journeyed to the river where Dionysus had indicated he might be sought, should the monarch ever require divine intervention. Dionysus stood in anticipation, as though privy to the inevitable unfolding of events. He exhibited no astonishment to see Midas appearing profoundly gaunt and utterly forlorn. "I was foolish," Midas uttered with stark honesty. "Please, I beg you, rescind this calamitous boon. I would prefer the humblest existence as the poorest man alive than to be the wealthiest sovereign incapable of holding his own child." Dionysus inclined his head with an air of compassionate understanding. "Bathe in the river Pactolus," he imparted his divine counsel. "Its waters will cleanse you of the golden touch, and you can revert to their original state those things you have altered by asperging them with its restorative liquid." Midas rushed with frantic urgency to the flowing stream and submerged himself, raiment and all. The exquisite liberation that enveloped him as the accursed ability receded was utterly ineffable. He collected ample quantities of the river water in various containers and hastened his return to his palace, meticulously dispersing it over every object he had transformed, reserving his beloved child as the final, most sacred act, hesitant, almost fearful, to entertain such a fragile prospect. But when the water made contact with Zoe's auric effigy, vibrant hues and vital warmth suffused her being, akin to the dawn's radiant embrace over a slumbering veil. Her initial gasp of air, her inaugural flutter of eyelids, her bewildered inquiry about why she experienced such an unyielding rigidity, these were auditory sensations more invaluable to Midas than any symphony ever composed. Later that very day, as they partook of a humble repast of bread and olives, Zoe asked her father why he appeared profoundly altered, demonstrably more engaged and observant of each utterance that passed her lips. Midas imparted a profound lesson concerning desires and their unforeseen repercussions, elucidating the distinction between perceived wants and genuine sources of felicity. Henceforth, the royal coffers maintained a humble capacity, Yet his gratitude for his every possession expanded beyond measure. He observed with keen delight the trajectory of dawn's illumination across Zoe's face at breakfast. He relished the unadorned flavors of wholesome fare enjoyed in the company of cherished individuals. He devoted considerable time to dialogues that generated no material riches, but imbued his existence with profound significance. The river Pactolus, legend has it, continues to bear shimmering particles of aurum in its waters, not as a direct consequence of Midas's curse, but rather as a perpetual reminder of the profound wisdom acquired on its banks concerning the essence of true value. Occasionally, in the hushed embrace of nocturnal hours, when the clamor of daily life subsides, one might be prompted to reflect upon personal aspirations, upon the distinction between superficial allure and genuine life enrichment. What uncomplicated delights have you perhaps disregarded in the fervent chase of things that appeared to possess greater worth? What instances of profound human rapport await recognition and tender appreciation, surpassing the value of all earthly riches, transitioning from narratives of profound loss and eventual reclamation? We shall now navigate towards an account that has intrigued scholars and dreamers across millennia. The legend of Atlantis, a metropolis of unparalleled technological sophistication, aesthetic grandeur, and inherent hubris that was utterly subsumed by the ocean's embrace within the span of a solitary diurnal and nocturnal cycle. Envision for a moment an insular realm situated beyond the fabled Pillars of Hercules, a geographical demarcation presently identified as the Strait of Gibraltar. This was not merely an unremarkable landmass, but a locale where the boundless inventiveness of humanity had fashioned marvels that appeared to defy conventional understanding, bordering on the supernatural. The city of Atlantis was constructed in an impeccably designed series of concentric rings, every annular segment delineated by intricate waterways that glistened with the effulgence of precious gemstones beneath the radiant Mediterranean sun. The Atlanteans were of a lineage traced directly to Poseidon, the formidable deity of the oceans. Their eponymous progenitor, Atlas, had been bestowed with suzerainty over this idyllic insular domain, and his people had received as patrimony both his profound sagacity and an intrinsic rapport with the surrounding aqueous expanse. Through countless epochs, they coexisted symbiotically with their oceanic environment. Their maritime vessels voyaged to far-flung territories not as belligerent subjugators, but as emissaries of commerce and enlightenment. The true distinction of Atlantis lay not solely in its material opulence, though the metropolis undeniably commanded treasures of unimaginable magnitude. The genuine marvel resided in the sophisticated orchestration of Atlantean society. They had instituted governmental frameworks that harmonized autonomous liberty with collective obligation. Their educational institutions imparted not merely utilitarian proficiencies, but also profound philosophical tenets and ethical principles. Their commercial exchanges functioned according to precepts of equitable distribution, guaranteeing universal access to essential provisions. The architectural vernacular of Atlantis eloquently mirrored this societal equilibrium. The centralmost ring encompassed the royal domicile and sacred edifices, erected from indigenous white, black, and red geological strata, extracted directly from the island's core. These buildings transcended mere utility. They were conceived to evoke awe and admiration in observers, their symmetrical dimensions fostering an ambiance of serenity and profound amazement. The intermediate concentric segments contained verdant horticultural spaces and physical training facilities, venues where the populace could cultivate both physical prowess and intellectual acumen. The outmost circumference accommodated artisanal ateliers and bustling maritime ports where the operational and commercial activities of the metropolis transpired. Yet, arguably, the most staggering testament to their genius lay in their unparalleled feats of engineering. The Atlanteans had devised an intricate network of viaducts and subterranean passages that interlinked every concentric segment, facilitating the unimpeded transit of both citizens and commodities throughout the city. They had pioneered sophisticated methodologies for environmental regulation that ensured optimal interior comfort within their buildings throughout all seasons. Their expansive maritime facilities were capable of receiving vessels from every corner of the then-charted globe, incorporating ingenious automated apparatuses that rendered the process of cargo embarkation and disembarkation remarkably expeditious and secure. Over the span of numerous centuries, this meticulously crafted societal framework functioned with exquisite efficacy. Atlantean voyagers returned laden with intellectual treasures gleaned from far-off civilizations, numerical theorems from the Mesopotamian cradle of Babylon, celestial charting from the ancient land of Egypt, abstract doctrines from the nascent Hellenic polities. But rather than merely assimilating these external tenets, the Atlanteans interwove them seamlessly with their inherent cultural heritage, thereby forging composite understandings that transcended the individual components, yielding superior intellectual constructs. The inexorable shift in their trajectory manifested incrementally, with such imperceptible progression that the majority of the Atlantean populace remained oblivious to its onset. Prosperity, it would appear, carries inherent perils. As the metropolis burgeoned in affluence, its inhabitants progressively commenced to regard their accomplishments as immutable entitlements. The intricate frameworks that previously demanded meticulous upkeep and unceasing vigilance were erroneously presumed to possess an inherent capacity for perpetual operation. The ethical precepts that had directed preceding epochs started to appear anachronistic, superfluous impediments to what they perceived as boundless capability. A nascent cohort of leadership ascended to prominence, individuals who had matured amidst the splendors of Atlantis, entirely unacquainted with the arduous endeavors required for their genesis. They surveyed their impeccably structured urbanity and resolved upon a course of outward expansion. The opportune moment, they declared, had arrived to disseminate Atlantis's purportedly superior methodologies to the global populace, irrespective of the international community's inclination to embrace such dissemination. These new arbiters of power commenced articulating a grand narrative of Atlantean fate, its inherent duty to shepherd less developed societies. They forged instruments of war with a sophistication mirroring their prior advancements in peaceful ingenuity. Their maritime vessels, formerly received in alien harbors as conduits of commerce and erudition, now commenced their arrivals as ominous heralds of subjugation. The profound societal transformation was discernible even within the mundane cadences of urban existence. The public agorist, where the citizenry formerly convened for deliberative policy discourse, evolved into venues for the mere promulgation of governmental decrees. Educational establishments initiated a pedagogical shift, prioritizing vocational instruction above profound moral contemplation. Artisanal manufactories redirected their efforts towards the fabrication of armaments and instruments of subjugation, as opposed to creations of aesthetic grace and practical benefit. However, The Olympian deities, most notably Zeus, the paramount sovereign, observed these escalating transgressions with mounting apprehension. The Atlanteans had been endowed with their extraordinary endowments as a grand empirical trial into the zenith of human capability. The central inquiry posited was, what pinnacles of achievement might humanity attain when nurtured by optimal circumstances and celestial counsel? This monumental endeavor was demonstrably faltering, not owing to exogenous duress or cataclysmic environmental phenomena, but rather as a direct consequence of the volitional decisions enacted by the Atlanteans themselves. Zeus convened a celestial conclave of the Olympian pantheon to deliberate upon the appropriate course of action. Certain deities advocated for direct intercession, proposing the issuance of divine omens and admonitions that could potentially steer Atlantis back towards its foundational principles. Conversely, other divine beings contended that the grand experiment ought to persist, positing that even a calamitous outcome could yield invaluable didactic insights. Yet, Zeus ultimately concluded that Atlantis had transmuted into an existential menace, not merely to other extant civilizations, but to the very equilibrium of the terrestrial sphere. The ultimate demise unfolded with terrifying celerity. Within the confines of a solitary diurnal and nocturnal cycle, marked by seismic convulsions and inundating deluges, the entirety of Atlantis was irrevocably submerged beneath the oceanic expanse. The meticulously designed waterways, once arteries of urban life, transformed into conduits for the relentless ingress of the sea. The resplendent architectural marvels, conceived for perpetual endurance, disintegrated under elemental powers that far exceeded their creators' most intricate computations. The armada of vessels, poised to project Atlantean dominion across the globe, were reduced to scattered detritus upon the abyssal plain. Yet the profound resonance of the Atlantean narrative transcends its mere function as an account of celestial retribution. It simultaneously serves as a potent testament to the enduring power of remembrance and the imperative of didactic acquisition. While the obliteration was absolute, the intellectual patrimony was not utterly extinguished. A contingent of Atlantean citizens had been engaged in peregrinations when the cataclysm manifested. Additional individuals had previously relocated to far-flung colonial settlements. These fortunate remnants bore with them not merely their advanced technical acumen, but also the indelible recollection of their civilization's zenith of accomplishment and the poignant understanding of its ultimate self-inflicted downfall. These disparate vestiges of Atlantean sagacity permeated and shaped the evolution of various other civilizations across the ancient world. The profound mathematical insights, for instance, seamlessly integrated into the burgeoning field of Babylonian astronomy, contributing to their sophisticated celestial observations and calendrical systems. Concurrently, the innovative architectural principles, embodying both grandeur and engineering prowess, found their magnificent expression in the enduring monuments of Egypt, from the colossal pyramids to the intricate temples. Furthermore, the abstract philosophical ideas, with their emphasis on reason and inquiry, significantly enriched and fostered the intellectual flourishing of Greek thought, laying foundations for Western philosophy. However, the Atlantean survivors exercised immense discretion, meticulously choosing to transmit only the constructive and beneficial facets of their formidable heritage, while diligently preserving and reiterating the critical warnings concerning hubris and the perilous misuse of power. It was precisely this profound cautionary tale resonating across epochs, that inspired Plato to chronicle the narrative of Atlantis many centuries subsequent to its supposed demise. He approached the subject not as a meticulous historian intent on recording empirical facts, but rather as a profound philosopher dedicated to the exploration of enduring ideas and universal truths. Through the evocative framework of the Atlantean saga, Plato meticulously examined a series of questions that possessed an urgent relevance for the citizens of ancient Athens. Just as they continue to challenge contemporary societies, he probed into the critical dilemma of what transpires when a civilization's technological capabilities or material achievements dramatically outstrip its collective wisdom and ethical compass. He further contemplated how a society might endeavor to perpetually uphold the fundamental values that were instrumental in its initial ascent to prominence, particularly when the very experience of success becomes so pervasive as to be considered an ordinary state. Lastly, he deliberated upon the inherent responsibilities that inevitably accompany the acquisition of power, whether wielded by an individual or collectively by an entire populace. The physical manifestation of Atlantis may indeed have been irrevocably swallowed by the ocean's depths, yet its profound, underlying significance persistently re-emerges and manifests in myriad novel forms throughout human history. Every civilization that has ascended to unparalleled heights of accomplishment has, without exception, ultimately been confronted with the identical pivotal choice that once faced the Atlanteans, whether to harness their considerable achievements as instruments for progressive construction and societal betterment, or to weaponize them for the purposes of domination and subjugation of others. As individuals contemplate the day's events before slumber, one might reflect upon the metaphorical small Atlantises within one's own sphere of influence. Consider the intricate systems and cherished relationships that have been diligently cultivated and now demand meticulous attention to sustain their health and vitality. Ponder the core values that continue to steer personal choices, particularly when the intoxicating allure of success makes it tempting to believe that established principles and rules no longer apply. Perhaps the most invaluable treasure is not merely the sum of what one has constructed, but rather the profound wisdom to safeguard and cherish the most essential aspects of those very creations. Shifting our focus from the enigmatic disappearance of fabled cities, let us now contemplate the cyclical transformations that inevitably recur throughout existence. This is the eternal rhythm that ushers in the contrasting forces of darkness and light, the profound duality of death and rebirth, an ending that perpetually contains the seeds of a new beginning. This narrative unfolds to explain the fundamental reason for the world's seasons, and to illuminate why, at times, the most imperative and transformative journeys are precisely those that compel individuals to venture farthest from their familiar abodes. Persephone, the cherished daughter of Demeter, the revered goddess of the bounteous harvest, had spent her formative years enveloped by the ceaseless abundance that her mother's divine touch perpetually generated. Their cherished dwelling was situated within a verdant valley where the essence of spring appeared to reign eternally. Flowers were perpetually in bloom, trees consistently bore luscious fruit, and the fields were perpetually prepared for an abundant harvest. It was undeniably a place of exquisite beauty, yet perhaps it was also somewhat excessively shielded, a touch too pristine and flawless for a young soul burgeoning with curiosity, about the vast, unexplored expanse of the wider world. Persephone's days were typically spent in idyllic wanderings through sun-drenched meadows, accompanied by her loyal companions, the ocean nymphs, who had been her steadfast playmates since the tenderest years of childhood. Together, they would gather vibrant wildflowers, meticulously weave intricate crowns from supple vines, share enchanting stories, and engage in spontaneous games that possessed no ulterior motive beyond the sheer exhilaration of joy itself. It was, by all accounts, an existence of unparalleled serenity and delight. Nevertheless, in recent times, Persephone had found herself increasingly susceptible to a peculiar and growing sense of restlessness, an intuitive feeling that a wealth of experiences and profound knowledge lay waiting just beyond the carefully demarcated confines of her mother's protected valley. She had begun to articulate inquiries to Demeter, questions that invariably instilled a palpable discomfort within the usually composed harvest goddess. She sought to understand what mysterious forces resided beneath the earth that enabled plants to grow with such vigor. She questioned why certain seeds necessitated burial in profound darkness before they could commence their inexorable ascent toward the light. She yearned to comprehend the unspoken segment of the life cycle, the aspect her mother meticulously avoided discussing, the process of dying that seemed to be an indispensable precursor to any subsequent rebirth. Demeter invariably would deftly redirect the conversation whenever these unsettling inquiries surfaced. She had invested immense effort and divine will into fashioning a realm where her beloved daughter would never have to endure the harsh realities of loss or suffering. The mere notion that Persephone might harbor a nascent curiosity regarding these more somber dimensions of existence profoundly disquieted her. In response, she intensified her protective vigilance, meticulously ensuring that her daughter's days were replete with an unending array of pleasant and diverting activities, specifically designed to draw her attention away from such perturbing thoughts. However, Hades, the formidable lord of the underworld, had been observing Persephone with keen interest from his remote and somber dominion. He had perceived her inherently questioning disposition, her palpable dissatisfaction with facile explanations, and her undeniable courage in daring to ask profound and challenging questions. In stark contrast to her mother, he did not find these qualities to be in any way troubling. On the contrary, he found them remarkably admirable. He recognized in her a spirit that might uniquely comprehend that darkness and light were not adversarial forces, but rather indispensable partners, inextricably linked in the magnificent and enduring dance of existence. The momentous day that irrevocably altered the course of events began with an aura of unremarkable normalcy. Persephone was engaged in her usual pastime of gathering flowers with her companions in a meadow that particular morning, seemed to possess an exceptional beauty. The verdant grass felt exquisitely soft beneath their feet, and the air was warm and permeated with the intoxicating, sweet fragrance of blooming narcissus. Persephone found her gaze irresistibly drawn to one particular flower, a narcissus that appeared to radiate a more intense vibrancy than all the others, its delicate petals catching the ambient light in a manner that was almost mesmerizing. As she gracefully bent to pluck this singularly extraordinary flower, the very earth beneath her feet dramatically sundered. Yet instead of plunging into an abyss, she experienced a sensation of being gently elevated by unseen hands, steadily carried downward through successive strata of rich soil and ancient stone, into sprawling caverns that glittered with an astonishing array of precious gems and rare metals. The journey, while undeniably tinged with an initial apprehension, was simultaneously imbued with a profound sense of wonder. She was being granted a glimpse into realms of the world that no living being had ever before witnessed. She ultimately arrived in the underworld, not as a captive or prisoner, but rather as an honored guest within a palace far more magnificent and awe-inspiring than anything her imagination could have conceived. The grand halls were meticulously carved from lustrous black marble, intricately veined with shimmering silver, and illuminated by ethereal flames that cast no shadows and emanated a gentle warmth devoid of any smoke. Gardens, too, flourished within this subterranean domain, yet they were utterly unlike any found in the upper world. Here grew plants that blossomed in perpetual darkness, trees that bore fruits of gleaming silver and gold, and flowers that emitted soft, melodic songs instead of releasing fragrance. Hades extended a greeting to her imbued with formal courtesy, patiently elucidating that he had brought her to his realm not out of any selfish desire, but because he firmly believed she possessed the singular capacity to truly comprehend both worlds, the vibrant realm of vigorous growth and abundant life above, and the profound realm of essential rest and transformative change below. He generously offered to unveil to her the intricate workings of his vast domain, revealing the complex systems that were, in fact, indispensable for enabling renewal and sustained life in the world above. What Persephone ultimately witnessed profoundly challenged and reshaped every preconceived notion she had ever been taught about death and the nature of endings. The underworld, she discovered, was not a punitive realm of eternal torment, but rather an expansive and sophisticated recycling system where souls found necessary repose and underwent a process of renewal between their successive lives. She observed firsthand the intricate mechanisms by which the vibrant energy of completed lives was meticulously transformed into the latent potential for new growth and future existence. She gained an invaluable understanding of the delicate and precise balance required to ensure that life on the surface of the earth remained perpetually sustainable. Meanwhile, in the upper world, Demeter had discovered her daughter's inexplicable disappearance and was consumed by a tempest of frantic grief and incandescent rage. She summarily abandoned her sacred duties as goddess of the harvest, forsaking her responsibilities as she roamed the earth in a desperate, relentless search for Persephone. Without Demeter's nurturing attention and divine oversight, crops across the land began to wither and fail. Trees ceased their bearing of fruit, and even the resilient grass began to visibly fade and die. The eternal spring that had characterized Demeter's realm gave way to an unprecedented phenomenon the world had never before experienced: a barren cold, a harsh season marked by pervasive scarcity, and an agonizing period of waiting. Mortals began to endure immense suffering as food supplies dwindled to critical levels, and the very earth itself seemed to be withdrawing its vital support for all life. They fervently prayed to the gods for intervention, but Demeter, in her profound anguish, remained deaf to their desperate pleas. She vowed she would not restore abundance to the blighted earth until her beloved daughter was safely returned to her embrace. Zeus, observing this escalating crisis unfold with mounting concern, finally determined that intervention was imperative. He dispatched Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, with the critical mission to negotiate with Hades for Persephone's immediate return. However, upon Hermes' arrival in the somber depths of the underworld, he encountered a situation far more intricate and nuanced than anticipated. Persephone had, in fact, consumed food of the underworld, yet not because she had been maliciously tricked or forcibly compelled. Rather, she had made a conscious and deliberate choice to taste a few seeds from a glistening pomegranate, fully accepting the profound consequences inherent in that action. More significantly, Persephone had undergone a profound internal transformation and had discovered that she no longer desired to return to her previous life permanently. The extensive knowledge and deep understanding she had acquired during her sojourn in the underworld had irrevocably altered her perspective. She now fully comprehended the underlying reasons for the restlessness she had experienced in her mother's perpetually protected valley. She had been intuitively sensing the inherent incompleteness of experiencing only one half of existence's grand, cyclical design. The judicious solution that ultimately emerged from the intricate negotiations proved to be satisfactory to all parties involved, albeit requiring a measure of sacrifice from each. Persephone would thenceforth dedicate a portion of each year to dwelling in the underworld with Hades, immersing herself further in the profound mysteries of death and the ceaseless processes of transformation. For the remainder of the year, she would return to the upper world, bringing with her the invaluable wisdom and deeper understanding she had gleaned from her time below. When Persephone returned for her inaugural reunion with Demeter, both mother and daughter were visibly and profoundly changed by their period of separation. Demeter had come to the sobering realization that her fiercely protective love, when taken to its absolute extremes, could inadvertently morph into its own restrictive form of imprisonment. Persephone, for her part, had gained a depth of knowledge that rendered her a more complete and fully realized individual, someone who now possessed a comprehensive understanding of both profound joy and poignant sorrow, the vibrant processes of growth and the essential periods of rest, the exhilaration of beginnings and the inevitability of endings. Their heartfelt reunion heralded the return of abundance to the parched earth. However, it was an abundance of a distinctly different nature than before, more intricate, more inherently sustainable, and grounded in a more realistic understanding of the world's rhythms. The world now experienced the distinct cycle of seasons. Periods of generous plenty now harmoniously alternated with times of necessary scarcity. Vigorous periods of growth were succeeded by essential periods of rest. This new order was neither a punishment nor a fundamental loss, but rather represented a more mature and comprehensive understanding of how natural cycles intrinsically operate. During the specific months when Persephone dwelled above ground, the earth burst forth with the vibrant bloom of spring and thrived luxuriantly throughout the warmth of summer. Conversely, during her time below in the underworld, autumn arrived, bringing with it the crucial period of harvest, followed by winter, which ushered in a necessary season of rest and dormancy for the land. Farmers, in turn, learned to work in concert with these established rhythms rather than in opposition to them, diligently storing the bounty from the growing season to sustain themselves and their communities through the fallow periods. Nevertheless, the profoundest boon bestowed by Persephone's harrowing odyssey was the invaluable sagacity she carried back concerning the indispensable role of arduous trials. She had come to comprehend that certain profound dimensions of personal advancement could exclusively blossom amidst shadows. that particular manifestations of resilience were forged solely through confronting formidable adversities, and that specific insights into existence emerged purely from enduring periods of sorrow and subsequent restoration. Consequently, she transformed into an emblematic mentor for humanity, grappling with their own unavoidable plunges into the unknown. Those junctures when existence itself compelled them to abandon cherished certainties and embark upon uncharted domains. Her enduring narrative served as a potent admonition, impressing upon them that such expeditions, regardless of their initial terrifying aspect, frequently culminated in profound revelations that rendered the voyagers more complete, more adept, and truly more vibrantly engaged with life. The Hellenic people of antiquity, in recounting this profound myth, clearly grasped a fundamental truth regarding the evolution of the human spirit. They recognized that individuals are incapable of perpetually lingering within the sheltered sanctuaries of early life. They understood that genuine maturation necessitates a profound reconciliation with the inevitable ebb and flow of sorrow and subsequent renewal. Furthermore, they held that profound sagacity frequently arises from the deliberate embrace of encounters that at first glance appear menacing or wholly undesirable. As the various epochs of one's personal existence persist in their timeless circuit, it behooves one to reflect upon the profound insights Persephone gleaned during her subterranean sojourn. Specifically, that occasionally the most profound blossoming of self occurs within the most obscure environments. That the conclusion of one chapter invariably creates fertile ground for the genesis of fresh starts, and that the fortitude to confront arduous transformations frequently ushers in revelations of greater worth than the accustomed ease relinquished. One might then ponder what nascent potentials lie dormant, poised to burgeon within the quiescent, seemingly unproductive periods of one's personal narrative. Shifting our focus from Persephone's deliberate immersion into the netherworld, our attention now pivots to a distinct subterranean expedition. However, this particular venture was propelled not by intellectual inquisitiveness, but rather by an affection so extraordinarily deep that it audaciously sought to defy the very foundational statutes governing all of reality. This, then, is the compelling saga of Orpheus, a legendary figure whose melodic artistry possessed the power to dislodge inert boulders and pacify ferocious creatures of the wild, and whose ardent devotion to Eurydice impelled him to undertake an endeavor universally deemed utterly unattainable. Orpheus, a figure of divine lineage, was the progeny of one of the revered 9 muses, those celestial patronesses who ignited the spark for every conceivable manifestation of artistic expression and intellectual pursuit. From his tenderest years, he had evinced an unparalleled aptitude for musical creation. Whenever his fingers graced the strings of his lyre, an exquisite stringed instrument personally fashioned by the Olympian deity Apollo, the very currents of rivers would diminish their velocity, pausing in their journey to absorb his harmonies. Majestic trees would incline their branches, as if straining to capture each individual resonance, and even the most savage beasts of the wilderness would settle into tranquil repose, utterly spellbound by the intricate tunes that appeared to encompass the full spectrum of global jubilation and lamentation. His musical craft was not merely aesthetically pleasing, it wielded a profound, altering influence. Agriculturalists observed that their harvests yielded with greater profusion when they could discern the faint strains of Orpheus's practice from afar. Pastoralists noted that their herds maintained a serene demeanor and robust health as his compositions wafted across the undulating terrains. Even within bustling urban centers, denizens recounted that disagreements among citizens proved simpler to reconcile, and the mundane obligations of daily existence felt considerably less onerous on those auspicious days when Orpheus graced the public squares with his performances. Yet, despite the boundless euphoria and solace his artistry imparted to countless others, Orpheus himself frequently experienced a profound sense of solitude. He possessed the extraordinary ability to sway vast assemblies, eliciting torrents of tears or bursts of mirth, and to galvanize them toward deeds of magnanimity or valor. Nevertheless, a deep yearning persisted within him for an individual who could apprehend not merely the exquisite tapestry of his compositions, but rather the intrinsic essence of the man who created the melodies. He yearned for a companion who perceived him as something far more substantial than a mere vessel for enchanting auditory experiences. That singular individual finally materialized in the form of Eurydice, an ethereal wood nymph whose inherent aptitudes seamlessly harmonized with and completed his own. Whereas Orpheus possessed the unparalleled talent to craft musical pieces that articulated the entire spectrum of human sentiment, Eurydice, in turn, possessed an innate and profound comprehension of the natural environment, a gift that enabled her to discern nuanced significances within his intricate compositions that eluded the grasp of all others. She could attend to a single one of his intricate tunes and instantly ascertain whether its creation had occurred amidst the nascent glow of dawn or the fading embers of twilight, whether his gaze had been fixed upon the majestic flight of eagles or the graceful undulations of aquatic life, or indeed, whether his very soul had resonated with an abundance of optimism or had been gently brushed by the wistful touch of sorrow. Their period of courtship unfolded with the serene elegance of a protracted, tender melody. They frequently ambled hand in hand through verdant woodlands where Orpheus would offer soft, impromptu performances on his lyre, while Eurydice, with her keen observational skills, would highlight the varied reactions of diverse creatures to particular musical motifs. She, in her turn, instructed him in the intricate art of seamlessly integrating organic sounds, the vibrant chirping of birds, the whispering rustle of wind through foliage, the gentle murmur of water cascading over pebbles into his burgeoning musical repertoire. He, reciprocally, illuminated for her the profound capacity of rhythm and melodic structure to articulate the complexities of human emotion in manners far surpassing the limitations of mere verbal expression. Their nuptials were an event of unparalleled splendor, commemorated by both the Olympian deities and the inhabitants of the mortal realm. Apollo himself deigned to furnish the musical accompaniment for the sacred rites, though he humbly conceded that his personal performance appeared rather unadorned when juxtaposed with the masterful accomplishments of his gifted protégé. All 9 muses graced the occasion with their presence, each lending her unique artistic talent to ensure the festivities attained absolute perfection. Hymen, the revered divinity presiding over matrimonial unions, bestowed his divine benediction upon their alliance, offering fervent supplications for enduring felicity and a lifetime of collaborative inspiration. For a fleeting yet blissful interlude, their shared existence precisely mirrored every aspiration they had harbored. They established an unpretentious dwelling within a secluded grove, a location whose natural acoustics proved ideally suited for the creation of music. Their mornings typically commenced with Orpheus immersed in composition, while Eurydice diligently nurtured their verdant garden. Each partner, attuned to the subtle cadence of the other's daily routine, found their individual pursuits weaving together to form a grander symphony of contentment, a harmony far exceeding what either could have forged in isolation. Evenings were dedicated to the delightful exchange of the day's fresh discoveries, a novel melodic phrase Orpheus had conceived, or an exotic avian cry Eurydice had mastered the art of imitation. However, the serene joy they cultivated was not an unobserved phenomenon. Indeed, it drew the attention of various entities, not all of whom harbored benevolent intentions. Aristeus, a lesser deity who had for an extended period harbored a fervent yearning for Eurydice, regarded their tranquil bliss with an escalating animosity. Prior to her marriage, he had assiduously presented Eurydice with lavish offerings and persistent overtures of affection, and her polite yet resolute repudiations had inflicted a wound upon his considerable pride far deeper than he was ever willing to acknowledge. On a particular afternoon, while Orpheus was away, engaged in a professional consultation with fellow musical artists, Aristeus seized the opportunity to accost Eurydice within the serene confines of her garden. His preliminary overtures for discourse were met with courteous yet unequivocal rejections. As his persistence intensified, culminating in the insinuation that she merited a consort of greater stature than a mere minstrel, Eurydice commenced a retreat towards the dense forest, her intention being to evade his pursuit amidst the sylvan labyrinth, where her nimble form could navigate with greater agility than his. In her frantic urgency to escape her tormentor, she inadvertently trod upon a highly venomous serpent that lay concealed, slumbering within the verdant expanse of the tall grasses. The subsequent bite was instantaneous and irrevocably lethal. By the moment Orpheus arrived back at their dwelling and discovered her lifeless form, her essence had already commenced its inexorable passage to the realm of the departed, leaving in its wake only the diminishing warmth of a physical vessel that no longer cradled the cherished spirit he adored. The depth of Orpheus's sorrow, following this devastating loss, transcended any anguish previously witnessed or recorded in the annals of the world. His mournful outcries were so utterly broken-hearted that their resonance disturbed the very fabric of the natural world. Ancient trees prematurely relinquished their foliage, casting their leaves earthward in an unseasonal cascade. Mighty rivers swelled beyond their customary confines, their waters overflowing their banks as if shedding colossal tears of sympathy. Even the most elusive wild creatures ventured forth from their concealed lairs, no longer enticed by the enchanting allure of his melodic artistry, as they once were, but rather compelled by a grief so utterly profound it appeared to resonate with and summon forth the shared pain of every living being that had ever known bereavement. For an indeterminate period, Orpheus remained utterly incapacitated, able only to sit vigilantly beside Eurydice's fresh grave, his lyre emitting mournful strains that articulated the full measure of his profound anguish. Yet, slowly, inexorably, a novel and audacious concept began to coalesce within his grieving mind. His musical prowess had consistently demonstrated an extraordinary capacity to accomplish feats deemed utterly unfeasible. Why then should the finality of death present an insurmountable barrier, distinct from any other formidable impediment he had previously overcome? if his enchanting compositions possessed the power to dislodge massive stones and quell tempestuous gales, it stood to reason that perhaps they could also sway the unyielding hearts of the formidable deities who held dominion over the subterranean kingdom. In defiance of the earnest counsel offered by every acquaintance and confidant, Orpheus, driven by an unwavering resolve, elected to undertake a perilous descent into the shadowy domain of Hades, intending to prostrate himself before its rulers and plead for Eurydice's restoration to the world of the living. He journeyed to one of the clandestine portals leading to the nether regions, a cavern of such abyssal depth and impenetrable gloom that no human being had ever emerged alive after venturing within its confines. Nevertheless, Orpheus stepped into the yawning maw of the abyss, armed with nothing but his revered lyre, implicitly placing his faith in the conviction that his melodies would afford him an unparalleled safeguard in a realm where conventional armaments and protective gear would prove utterly ineffectual. His odyssey through the infernal domain was akin to traversing a desolate panorama sculpted from congealed despair. He navigated through immense subterranean chambers where the very rock faces appeared to weep incessantly, crossed torrents that coursed with the collective tears of innumerable mourners, and passed through spectral valleys where the pervasive mist condensed from the final exhalations of the departed. Yet, wherever his determined footsteps led him, his exquisite music served as his herald. And the denizens of this somber realm, entities long resigned to an existence of perpetual melancholy, discovered within themselves an emotion they had all but expunged from their memory, the fragile glimmer of hope. Even Cerberus, the formidable three-headed hound appointed as the vigilant guardian of Hades's formidable gates, was profoundly affected by Orpheus's plaintive strains. Rather than assailing the audacious mortal who dared to infringe upon his dominion, the colossal beast gently lowered all three of its monstrous heads and permitted its multiple eyes to drift shut, gradually lulled into a profound and tranquil slumber by the melodies that eloquently articulated an affection so potent it effortlessly transcended the very demarcation between terrestrial life and the eternal stillness of death. Upon Orpheus's eventual arrival at the imposing throne room shared by Hades and Persephone, his extraordinary music had, in essence, already heralded his presence. The formidable sovereigns of the underworld were seated in anticipation, acutely aware that they were on the cusp of receiving an appeal utterly unparalleled by any petition ever voiced within the confines of their grim dominion. Orpheus then performed for them, through the exquisite artistry of his lyre, the complete narrative of his profound affection for Eurydice, recounting their initial encounter, the tender unfolding of their courtship, the ephemeral period of their shared bliss, and the cataclysmic agony of his bereavement. Yet, transcending mere biographical recounting, he rendered the very essence of love itself into melody, crafting harmonies that stirred within even these immortal entities recollections of cherished bonds they held dear, of personal bereavements they had endured, and of the profound manner in which genuine devotion to another soul imbues existence with its most profound and enduring significance. Persephone, who possessed an intimate and unparalleled understanding of the poignant anguish associated with separation from beloved individuals, openly shed tears as she absorbed the heart-rending performance. Hades, whose stoic nature rendered him typically impervious to the supplications of mortal beings, unexpectedly found himself revisiting the echoes of his own profound yearning during those recurring seasons when Persephone resided in the vibrant upper world. Thus, for the inaugural occasion in the extensive annals of their dominion, the omnipotent rulers of the deceased consented to liberate a spirit, permitting its return to the precious embrace of life. The divine boon, however, was not without its stringent stipulations. Eurydice was permitted to rejoin Orpheus in the vibrant realm of the living, but during their arduous journey out of the underworld, he was strictly forbidden from casting his gaze upon her. He was to rely implicitly on her presence trailing behind him, cultivating an unwavering conviction in the unseen. This condition demanded that he prove the profound resilience of his affection, rooted in profound belief rather than a continuous need for visual validation or reassurance. Their arduous ascent commenced with an exhilarating sense of elation. Orpheus distinctly perceived the gentle cadence of Eurydice's footsteps echoing in his wake, a familiar sound that brought immense comfort. He experienced her familiar aura, that intimate sensation of her proximity, just as he had always recognized her nearness in the sunlit world. Their path involved traversing the labyrinthine passages and desolate chasms of the infernal domain, progressing with determined resolve towards the ethereal glow that delineated the sacred frontier separating the shadowy domain of the deceased from the vibrant expanse of mortal existence. However, as they painstakingly ascended the ultimate stretch of the subterranean pathway, nearing the threshold of the upper world, an insidious tendril of apprehension began to insinuate itself into Orpheus's consciousness. The subtle rhythm of the footsteps he had relied upon appeared to recede, becoming increasingly indistinct, and the comforting certainty of Eurydice's spectral presence grew disturbingly ambiguous. A chilling question assailed him. Could the formidable deities have perpetrated a cruel deception? Was it conceivable that he was ascending solitary towards the radiant daylight, while Eurydice languished, irrevocably ensnared in the abyssal depths? The terrifying notion that his profound conviction had been utterly misdirected, and that his cherished wife was, at that very moment, being forcibly drawn back into the unfathomable chasms he was forever barred from re-entering, gripped him with paralyzing dread. Precisely as the cavern's aperture materialized before him, and the first invigorating rays of the terrestrial sun brushed against his weary countenance, Orpheus's steadfast resolution utterly crumbled. Yielding to an overwhelming urge, he impulsively pivoted, casting a desperate glance behind him, seeking tangible reassurance of Eurydice's corporeal presence. And indeed, for one fleeting, agonizing instant, she was there. His eyes met hers, beholding her countenance and witnessing her hand extending towards him, imbued with profound affection and compassionate comprehension. Yet, in that very identical moment, her form commenced an irreversible dissolution, summoned back to the netherworld, an irrevocable consequence of his transgression against the divine mandate. Her final utterance, rather than conveying condemnation, resonated with an enduring tenderness. She grasped the profound human frailty that had compelled his action, absolving him of the very doubt that had tragically unraveled their shared destiny, even as she receded irrevocably into the encroaching gloom. A tender smile, imbued with the identical, serene empathy that had initially captivated his heart, graced her lips in her vanishing. Orpheus, bereft and solitary, eventually surfaced from the subterranean realm. This subsequent bereavement inflicted a wound far more profound and agonizing than his initial grief, for he bore the crushing burden of self-reproach, acutely aware that his own actions had precipitated this irreparable tragedy. A desperate attempt to re-enter the chasm was met with an immutable barrier. The cavern's mouth had hermetically sealed itself. The divine clemency, once spurned through human frailty, would not be extended a second time. He spent the remainder of his earthly existence as an itinerant minstrel, forever roaming. His melodies, imbued with an unprecedented profundity of lamentation and sagacity, transcended their former potency, resonating with an almost supernatural strength. Individuals journeyed from far-flung territories to bear witness to his mournful performances, drawn not by the promise of mirth, but by the profound solace his artistry offered in comprehending their personal bereavements, their internal conflicts with conviction and uncertainty, and their own encounters with an affection so profound that the mere prospect of its cessation became an almost intolerable burden. The poignant narrative of Orpheus and Eurydice has transcended millennia, recounted ceaselessly through countless generations, for its profound resonance with an intrinsic, ubiquitous facet of the human condition. Every individual encounters junctures where action must be predicated upon unwavering conviction rather than empirical verification. There are instances when profound affection compels us to place our credence in that which remains imperceptible or unprovable. The inherent human inclination to glance backward, to seek tangible affirmation when presented with an imperative to believe, is universally understood. As one approaches the threshold of slumber, it is pertinent to ponder the profound insights this venerable tale imparts regarding the intricate interplay of reliance and skepticism. What personal odysseys in your existence necessitate an unshakable belief in lieu of absolute assurance? Which interpersonal bonds compel you to embrace their veracity, even amidst the absence of consistently discernible or palpable proof? It is conceivable that the most sublime melodies we fashion are not sculpted by conventional instruments, but rather by the sheer fortitude to persist in our forward trajectory towards the illumination, even when deprived of the capacity to ascertain whether affection faithfully trails in our wake.